At Christmas, my mother-in-law proudly introduced a new woman to my husband. I smiled sweetly. By the way, the house is in my name, not his. The room froze. My name is Emily, and until 8 weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage to Liam Turner. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 4, and I genuinely believed we were building something beautiful together. How naive I was. The warning signs had been there for months, but I'd attributed them to work stress. Liam worked as a financial advisor at his father's firm, Turner & Associates, while I ran my own successful marketing consultancy from our home office. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in his appearance. I should have connected the dots sooner. It wasn't until I accidentally saw a text notification on his phone while he was in the shower that everything clicked into place. See you tomorrow night. Can't wait to finally meet your family. P says you've told them we're just friends for now. The message was from someone named Lily. My blood ran cold when I realized P meant Helen, his mother. Helen Turner had never liked me. From the moment Liam brought me home to meet his family, she made it clear I wasn't good enough for her precious son. She'd wanted him to marry Chelsea Morrison, the daughter of another wealthy family in their social circle. When Liam chose me instead, a middle-class girl who'd worked her way through college and built her own business, Helen never forgave it either of us. But I never imagined she'd stoop to orchestrating an affair. Over the next 8 weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I hired a private investigator named Jason Lee, who confirmed my worst fears. Liam had been seeing Lily Harris for 3 months. She was a 25-year-old real estate agent who'd recently moved to town, and according to Jason's research, Helen had introduced them at a charity gala I'd skipped due to a client emergency. The photos Jason showed me were devastating. Liam and Lily at restaurants I'd never been to, holding hands while walking through the park where he proposed to me, kissing in the parking lot of the gym where we had a joint membership. But the most infuriating part was discovering that Helen was actively encouraging the relationship, even hosting dinner parties where Lily played the role of Liam's girlfriend while I was supposedly away on business trips that didn't actually exist. As heartbroken as I was, I'm also incredibly practical. Instead of confronting Liam immediately, I started planning. My father had taught me chess when I was 7, and his favorite saying was, "Never make a move until you can see the whole board." It was time to study the board very carefully. First, I reviewed every legal document related to our marriage and assets. When we got engaged, my lawyer had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Liam had been offended initially, but I'd explained that, as a business owner, I needed to protect my company and personal assets. The prenup was ironclad. What was mine remained mine, and what was his remained his. More importantly, the house we lived in, the beautiful 4-bedroom colonial that Helen always bragged about to her friends, was purchased entirely with my money and remained solely in my name. Next, I documented everything. Every business expense Liam had charged to our joint account, every client dinner that was actually a date with Lily, every lie he told me about his whereabouts. I kept our joint accounts active, but started monitoring every transaction in real time through banking apps, screenshotting everything for evidence. I created a detailed spreadsheet that would make any accountant proud. Then I started making strategic moves. I quietly opened new personal accounts and began redirecting my business income there while maintaining just enough in our joint accounts to avoid suspicion. I scheduled a meeting with my divorce attorney Sophia Diaz, who'd handled my business contracts for years. I updated my will and all my insurance policies. I even had the locks changed on my office space downtown where I'd been considering moving my business full-time. But most importantly, I planned the perfect reveal. Helen had always insisted on hosting elaborate holiday celebrations. Thanksgiving had been uncomfortable with Liam acting distant and Helen making pointed comments about young couples growing apart and finding happiness in unexpected places. But Christmas was her crown jewel event, a formal dinner party for 30 of their closest friends and family members. When Helen called to confirm our attendance, her voice dripped with fake sweetness. "Oh, Emily darling, I hope you don't mind, but I've invited a lovely young woman named Lily to join us. She's new in town and doesn't have family nearby. You know how I hate for anyone to be alone during the holidays." I could hear the smugness in her voice, the barely contained excitement. She thought she was cornering me, forcing me to watch my husband's mistress play house at their family celebration. What she didn't realize was that she was giving me the perfect stage for my own performance. The week before Christmas, I went shopping, not for gifts, but for the perfect outfit for the dinner. I chose a stunning red dress that Liam had always loved, paired with a diamond jewelry he'd given me for our anniversary. I wanted to look absolutely radiant when their world came crashing down. I also made one final preparation. I called my brother Jack and my best friend Olivia, asking them to be on standby. I didn't tell them everything, but I hinted that I might need support after Christmas dinner. Both promised to keep their phones close. Christmas Day arrived crisp and clear. Liam was unusually attentive that morning, bringing me coffee in bed and commenting on how beautiful I looked. I wondered if his conscience was bothering him or if Helen had coached him to be extra sweet before they blindsided me with their surprise. We arrived at the Turner family estate at exactly 6:30. The house was decorated like something from a magazine with twinkling lights and perfect garland draped over every surface. Helen greeted us at the door, wearing a navy blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Emily darling, you look lovely," she said, kissing my cheek with all the warmth of a snake. Come in. Come in. Everyone's dying to see you both." The living room was filled with the usual suspects. Liam's father, George, his sister, Rachel, and her husband Chris, various aunts, uncles and cousins, and several family friends I'd known for years. But sitting prominently on the sofa next to Helen's usual spot was a young woman I'd never seen in person, though I'd studied enough surveillance photos to recognize her immediately. Lily Harris was exactly what I'd expected. Tall, blonde, and polished to perfection. She wore a cream-colored dress that was clearly expensive but appropriately modest for a family dinner. When she saw Liam, her face lit up in a way that might have been heartbreaking if I hadn't been prepared for it. "Liam," Helen called out. "Come meet Lily. I've told her so much about you." I watched my husband's performance with grudging admiration. He managed to look surprised and pleased while shaking Lily's hand, holding it just a fraction longer than necessary. "Lily, what a pleasure. Mom mentioned you were new in town." "Yes, I moved here from Boston about 8 months ago," Lily replied, her voice warm and friendly. "Your mother has been so welcoming. She's told me wonderful things about the whole family." I stood there smiling, playing the role of the devoted wife. While my marriage disintegrated in front of me, several people tried to include me in the conversation, but I could feel the undercurrent of anticipation in the room. Helen's closest friends, women who'd always treated me with polite disdain, were watching me with barely concealed excitement. Dinner was called at 8 o'clock, and Helen had clearly orchestrated the seating arrangement. Liam was positioned directly across from Lily, with me relegated to the far end of the table between his elderly Uncle Jack and his cousin's wife Karen, who'd always been kind to me. The conversation flowed around topics I'd heard 1,000 times before. George's latest golf tournament, Rachel's children's accomplishments, the family's upcoming vacation to the Bahamas. But I could feel the tension building as Helen kept steering the conversation back to Lily, praising her career, her education, her family background. "Lily graduated from Harvard Business School," Helen announced during the salad course. "Just like our Liam. They have so much in common." "How interesting," I replied smoothly, meeting Lily's eyes across the table. "Business school must have been quite an experience. I went straight from undergraduate to starting my own company, so I sometimes wonder what I missed." Lily smiled politely. "Oh, there's nothing wrong with learning through experience. Mom mentioned you have your own marketing firm." "That's right. We specialize in crisis management and reputation recovery. It's amazing how quickly a solid reputation can be destroyed and how much work it takes to rebuild trust once it's broken." Liam shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Helen pressed on. "Lily works in real estate. She's already one of the top agents in her firm." "Real estate can be such a relationship-based business," I observed. "Trust is everything, isn't it? Clients need to know their agent has their best interests at heart, not some hidden agenda." The conversation continued through the main course, with Helen becoming increasingly bold in her praise of Lily, and increasingly pointed in her comments about young people finding their true paths and life taking unexpected turns. During the beef Wellington course, I noticed Lily stealing glances at Liam when she thought no one was looking. There was genuine affection in her eyes, which almost made me feel sorry for her. She had no idea she was being used as a pawn in Helen's chess game, just as much as I was. "Lily, tell us about your family," Helen prompted, clearly steering toward another rehearsed talking point. "I understand your father is in finance as well." "Yes, he's a portfolio manager in Boston," Lily replied, unconsciously straightening her posture. "He actually went to Harvard Business School too, about 20 years before Liam." "Did? How wonderful," Helen exclaimed as if this was the most delightful coincidence in the world. "Liam, didn't you say you were thinking about expanding the firm's investment services?" Liam nodded, playing his part perfectly. "We've been considering it. It would be helpful to have someone with that kind of background on the team." I watched this performance with growing fascination. They clearly planned this conversation, probably rehearsed it multiple times. Helen was systematically establishing Lily's credentials, her family connections, her potential value to the Turner family business. It was like watching a job interview disguised as small talk. "And Lily, you mentioned you're originally from Connecticut?" George asked, seemingly oblivious to his wife's machinations. "That's right, Greenwich. My family has a place on the water there. Nothing too fancy, just a little cottage we've had for generations." I nearly choked on my wine. A little cottage in Greenwich that had been in the family for generations, probably cost more than most people's houses. Helen's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. She found herself a daughter-in-law with both money and pedigree. "How lovely," I interjected smoothly. "Greenwich is beautiful. Liam and I looked at properties there when we first got married, but we decided we preferred being closer to the city for work purposes." It was a subtle reminder that Liam and I had made joint decisions about our life together, but I could see Helen filing it away as evidence of my practical, unromantic nature. "Emily's always been very focused on convenience over beauty," Helen said with a tight smile. "It's admirable really how dedicated she is to her work." The backhanded compliment hung in the air like smoke. Several people around the table shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the subtle dig, even if they weren't sure how to respond to it. "I've always believed that loving what you do makes you better at everything else in life," I replied evenly. "When you're fulfilled professionally, you have more energy and enthusiasm to bring to your personal relationships." Lily smiled genuinely at this. "I completely agree. I love real estate because I get to help people find their dream homes. There's something so satisfying about matching the right person with the right property." "How do you determine what makes a property right for someone?" Liam asked, and I could hear the flirtation in his voice, even if others might have missed it. "Well," Lily said, warming to the topic, "you have to really listen to what they're saying, and what they're not saying. Sometimes people think they want one thing, but what they really need is something completely different." The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with my dessert fork. Lily was unknowingly describing exactly what Helen had done to her, convinced her she wanted Liam when what she really needed was to run as far away from this family as possible. "That sounds like quite a skill," Rachel commented. "I imagine you have to be very perceptive about people's motivations." "You do," Lily agreed. "Unfortunately, not everyone is honest about what they want or what their situation really is. I've had clients lie about their budget, their timeline, even their relationship status. It makes the job much more challenging." Liam went very still at this comment, and I saw Helen's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Lily had just unknowingly described her own situation perfectly. She was being lied to about Liam's relationship status, his timeline, and his true motivations. "Honesty is so important in any relationship," I said, looking directly at Lily. "Professional or personal. Once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild." "Absolutely," Lily said earnestly. "I always tell my clients that we can work through almost any challenge as long as we're honest with each other from the start." The conversation was becoming almost surreal. Lily kept making points that undermined her own position without realizing it. While Liam grew more and more uncomfortable, and Helen worked harder to steer things back to safer topics. "Lily, you must tell us about that lovely property you sold last month," Helen interjected quickly. "The one with the gorgeous gardens." But before Lily could answer, Uncle Jack, who'd been quietly working his way through his third glass of wine, spoke up. "You know, this whole conversation reminds me of when I was in real estate years ago. Had this client once who was married, but told everyone he was single. Caused quite a mess when the truth came out." The table fell silent except for the soft clink of silverware against china. Jack, bless his heart, continued obliviously. "Fellow thought he was being clever, keeping his wife in the dark while he shopped for a love nest with his girlfriend. But the girlfriend found out about the wife. The wife found out about the girlfriend, and both women ended up owning pieces of him in the divorce settlement." Helen, clearly embarrassed, said sharply, "Perhaps we should discuss something more pleasant." "Oh, it turned out quite pleasant in the end," Jack continued cheerfully. "The wife took him for everything he was worth. The girlfriend realized she'd dodged a bullet, and both women ended up much happier without him. Funny how these things work out sometimes." I raised my wineglass slightly in Jack's direction. "To justice being served," I said quietly, but not so quietly that the table couldn't hear me. Lily was looking increasingly uncomfortable, though I wasn't sure if she understood why Jack's story was relevant. Liam, on the other hand, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. "Well," Helen said brightly, clearly desperate to change the subject. "Shall we move on to dessert?" I made my famous chocolate torte. As Helen bustled around serving dessert, I caught Karen, the cousin's wife, beside me, giving me a meaningful look. She leaned over and whispered, "Are you okay, honey? You seem a little tense tonight." I smiled at her gratefully. Karen had always been observant and kind, never part of Helen's inner circle, but always trying to smooth over family tensions. "I'm fine," I whispered back, just enjoying the family dynamics. Karen studied my face for a moment, then glanced around the table. I could see understanding dawning in her eyes as she took in Helen's obvious matchmaking efforts, Liam's discomfort, and Lily's innocent participation in what was clearly a setup. "Oh my," Karen breathed quietly. "Emily, do you need?" "I've got it handled," I assured her softly. "But thank you." Karen squeezed my hand under the table, and I felt a surge of gratitude for her kindness. It reminded me that not everyone in this family was complicit in Helen's schemes. The chocolate torte was admittedly delicious. Helen might be a master manipulator, but she was also an excellent cook. I found myself savoring each bite, knowing it would likely be the last time I'd taste her famous dessert. "This is incredible, Mrs. Turner," Lily said enthusiastically. "Would you be willing to share the recipe?" "Oh, it's a family recipe," Helen replied with false modesty. "I only share it with family members." The implication was clear. Once Lily married Liam and I was out of the picture, she'd be worthy of the precious torte recipe. It was such a petty little power play, but it perfectly encapsulated everything that was wrong with Helen's worldview. "That's a shame," I said conversationally. "I've been asking for that recipe for 8 years. I guess I never quite made it into the inner circle." The comment was light enough to seem like a joke, but pointed enough to make several people uncomfortable. Rachel looked mortified. George frowned at his wife, and even Lily seemed to sense the underlying tension. "Emily, you know that's not—" Helen started. But I held up my hand. "It's fine, Helen. I understand. Some things are reserved for blood relatives and future daughters-in-law." The emphasis on future was subtle but unmistakable. Lily looked confused, glancing between Helen and me as if trying to understand why a recipe was causing such tension. It was then, as I watched Lily's genuine bewilderment and saw Helen's satisfied smirk, that I realized the full extent of the cruelty in this situation. Helen wasn't just trying to humiliate me. She was using Lily to do it, all while keeping Lily in the dark about her true role in the scheme. Lily thought she was at a family dinner making friends. She had no idea she was the weapon Helen was wielding against me. That realization crystallized my resolve. When Helen made her grand announcement, I would make sure Lily understood exactly how she'd been used, not to hurt her, but to free her from Helen's manipulation. It was during dessert that Helen finally made her move. "This is Lily," Helen announced proudly, raising her wine glass and gesturing toward the blonde beside her. "She'll be perfect for Liam after the divorce." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Every conversation stopped. Uncle Jack nearly dropped his fork. Rachel gasped audibly. Even George, who'd clearly not been informed of his wife's plan, looked stunned. But I was ready. I calmly buttered my roll, taking my time to spread it evenly, while every eye in the room focused on me. Then I looked up with my brightest smile. "How nice," I said sweetly, turning to Lily. "Did they mention that the house Liam and I live in is in my name, and that there's a prenup in place protecting every single asset that matters?" Liam went completely still, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips, his face draining of color as he realized the trap they'd walked into. Lily's confident smile faltered as she looked between Helen and Liam, confusion replacing her earlier composure. But I wasn't done. "I'm curious, Lily," I continued, my voice conversational and friendly. "When exactly did you and Liam start your relationship? Was it before or after the charity gala in June where Helen introduced you?" The color drained from Lily's face. I'm not sure what you're implying." "Oh, I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts like the fact that you've been seeing my husband for 3 months, or that you've been to dinner at Marcello's 7 times together. They have excellent security cameras, by the way. Or that Helen has been hosting cozy little dinner parties where you play house while I'm supposedly out of town." Helen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Emily, I don't know what you think you know, but what I know," I interrupted, reaching into my purse and pulling out a manila folder, "is that I have a private investigator who's very thorough in his work. Would you like to see the photos, Helen? Or should I just tell everyone about the time you told Lily that once Liam divorced me, she'd be living in the big house and wouldn't have to worry about money anymore?" The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the soft clink of ice in someone's water glass, the barely audible gasp from Rachel. Liam finally found his voice. "Emily, please. Let's not do this here. Why not here? I asked, genuinely curious. This is where your mother chose to humiliate me in front of your entire family. This is where she thought she'd force me to sit quietly while she introduced your replacement. So this seems like the perfect place to set the record straight. I stood up, smoothing my red dress, and addressed the room like I was giving a business presentation. For those of you who are wondering, yes, Liam has been having an affair. Yes, Helen orchestrated it. And yes, they've been planning to divorce me so Liam can marry Lily and live in what Helen calls the big house. I turned back to Lily, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. The thing is, Lily, that big house, I bought it with my money before Liam and I got married, and according to our prenuptial agreement, it remains mine regardless of what happens to our marriage. Lily's voice was barely a whisper. Liam told me you were separated. He said you were just waiting to make it official after the holidays. Did he also tell you about the joint account he's been using to pay for your dates? The one that I've been monitoring every transaction, or that the business trips I've been taking that gave you time alone were fictional? Liam stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's enough, Emily. Is it? I asked. Because I don't think I've covered everything yet. Should I mention that you've been telling Lily I'm emotionally distant and we haven't been intimate in months? Because that's interesting considering we were together 2 nights ago. Lily made us sound like a wounded animal and looked at Liam with betrayal in her eyes. You said you were sleeping in the guest room. You said you hadn't. That you two weren't. He lied, I said simply. About a lot of things. It turns out Helen finally found her voice again. But it came out as a screech. How dare you come into my home and make these accusations? Liam deserves better than someone who cares more about business than her own marriage. You're absolutely right, I agreed. Liam does deserve better. He deserves someone who's honest with him. Someone who doesn't orchestrate affairs behind his back. Someone who doesn't manipulate him into betraying his wife. I looked around the room at the shocked faces of people who had known me for 7 years. For those of you who are wondering what happens now, I've already prepared divorce papers. They'll be filed tomorrow morning, but I wanted everyone to know the truth first. Marie, the cousin's wife beside me, reached over and squeezed my hand. Emily, honey, I'm so sorry. Thank you, I said genuinely. I appreciate that, and I want everyone to know that this wasn't a decision I made lightly. I tried to save my marriage. I tried to figure out what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed as a wife. I looked directly at Liam, who was staring at his plate like it might offer him an escape route. But then I realized I hadn't failed at anything. I'd been loyal, supportive, and loving for 7 years. I built a successful business while supporting my husband's career. And I tried to build relationships with his family, even when they made it clear I wasn't welcome. Helen started to object, but I held up my hand. I'm not done. You see, the thing about having your own business in crisis management is that you learn to plan for every contingency. So, while Liam was planning his new life with Lily, I was planning to. I reached into my folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. These are copies of every transaction Liam made using our joint accounts for his dates with Lily. Restaurants, gifts, even the hotel room you two used last weekend while I was supposedly visiting my sister. Lily buried her face in her hands. Liam looked like he was going to be sick. The total comes to $12,000 over 3 months, I continued, which according to our prenup constitutes financial infidelity and gives me grounds to pursue additional damages. George finally spoke up, his voice gruff with embarrassment. Emily, perhaps we should discuss this privately. With respect, George, there's nothing private about it anymore. Your wife made sure of that when she invited Lily to publicly humiliate me. I turned to Lily one final time. I don't blame you entirely, Lily. Liam is very charming when he wants to be, and Helen can be very convincing, but you should know that the man you thought you were in love with has been lying to both of us. Lily looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I really thought Liam said, you two were already separated. She showed me pictures of Liam looking miserable and said, you were cold and career-obsessed. I'm sure she did, I replied gently. Helen's never approved of me. But Lily, think about this. If Liam was willing to lie to me for 5 months, if he was willing to use our joint money to wine and dine you, if he was willing to let his mother orchestrate an affair rather than having an honest conversation with his wife about problems in our marriage, what does that tell you about his character? The room was so quiet I could hear the furnace kicking on in the basement. Finally Rachel broke the silence. Emily, I don't know what to say. I had no idea any of this was happening. I know, I said, my voice softer now. Most of you didn't. And I don't hold that against anyone. But I needed you all to know the truth before you started hearing Helen's version of events. I gathered my purse and my folder, preparing to leave. The divorce will be final in 2 months. Liam can stay in the house until then, but after that, he'll need to find somewhere else to live. I'll be moving my business to my downtown office full-time, so I won't be working from home anymore. Liam finally looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the man I'd fallen in love with. Emily, please. Can't we talk about this? Can't we try to work it out? Work what out? I asked. Liam, the lies, the cheating. The fact that your mother has been actively sabotaging our marriage for 5 months while you went along with it. He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. Actually, don't answer that because here's what I've realized over the past few weeks. I don't want to work it out. I don't want to be married to someone who solves problems by having affairs. I don't want to be part of a family that thinks humiliation is an acceptable form of entertainment. I looked around the room one last time. To those of you who've been kind to me over the years, thank you. I'll miss you. To those of you who haven't, well, I won't. As I headed toward the door, Lily called out behind me. Emily, wait. I turned back to see her standing, her face pale but determined. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never would have if I'd known he was lying. I believe you, I said honestly. But Lily, you need to ask yourself why Helen was so eager to break up her son's marriage. And you need to ask Liam why he was so willing to let her do it. Helen stood up then, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You self-righteous little. George's voice cut through his wife's rage like a knife. Sit down. You've done enough. I smiled at George, a man who had always been kind to me despite his wife's attitude. Thank you for 7 years of kindness, George. I'll always be grateful for that. And then I walked out of the Turner family home for the last time. The next morning my phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Lily. Emily, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from... Well, Liam had it in his phone. It's fine, I said, surprised by the call. What can I do for you? I ended it, she said simply. Last night after you left. I told Liam I couldn't be with someone who could lie so easily to someone he claimed to love. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I know you cared about him. I thought I did. But you were right. If he could lie to you for 5 months, what was he doing to me? And Helen? Lily's voice trailed off. What about Helen? She called me last night after I got home. She was furious that I'd ruined everything by ending it with Liam. She said I was just like you, too independent and too difficult. She said I'd never find another man as good as Liam. I couldn't help but laugh. Well, that's Helen for you. The thing is, Lily continued. I realized something while she was screaming at me. She didn't care about Liam's happiness or mine. She just wanted to win. She wanted to prove she could break up your marriage and control her son's life. That's exactly right, I confirmed. I was never the problem, Lily. You wouldn't have been the solution. Helen just wanted to be in charge. We talked for another 15 minutes. Lily told me she was considering moving back to Boston, that the whole experience had left her feeling manipulated and used. I found myself giving her advice about trusting her instincts and not letting other people define her worth. It was strange bonding with my husband's mistress over how we'd both been manipulated by his mother. The divorce proceedings went smoothly, exactly as Sophia Diaz had predicted. Liam didn't contest anything, probably because he knew the evidence against him was overwhelming. The house remained mine along with my business and all my personal assets. Liam kept his share of our joint savings and his own belongings. 2 months later, I ran into Rachel at the grocery store. She looked embarrassed when she saw me, but I smiled and approached her anyway. How are you doing, Rachel? I'm so sorry, Emily, about everything. About Christmas dinner, about Mom, about Liam. I had no idea. I know you didn't. How is Liam? She sighed. He moved in with Mom and Dad temporarily. He's been pretty miserable, actually. I think he's starting to realize what he lost. And Helen? Rachel actually laughed, though it sounded pained. She's been telling everyone who will listen that you trapped Liam with a prenup and that you seduced him away from his true love. Most people aren't buying it, especially after Lily left town and told her side of the story to several mutual friends. Lily left? Yeah, about a month ago. But before she did, she had lunch with several of the women who were at Christmas dinner. She told them everything. How Mom had manipulated her, how Liam had lied to her, how she felt used by both of them. I felt a surge of pride for Lily. It took courage to admit you'd been fooled and even more courage to set the record straight. I'm glad she found her voice, I said. Emily, Rachel said hesitantly. I know this is probably too late, but I want you to know that some of us never agreed with how Mom treated you. We didn't know how to stand up to her without causing a family war. I understand, I said, and I did. Helen was a formidable woman who'd ruled her family through manipulation and emotional blackmail for decades. But maybe it's time someone did cause a war. Rachel smiled ruefully. Actually, Dad's been giving her a pretty hard time about the whole thing. He was mortified by her behavior at Christmas dinner. They're in marriage counseling now. 6 months after the divorce was final, I received an unexpected visitor at my downtown office. Liam stood in my waiting room looking older and tired, holding a small bouquet of flowers. I know I don't have the right to be here, he said when my assistant showed him into my office. But I needed to apologize. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Okay, I'm listening. He sat down heavily and placed the flowers on my desk. I've been going to therapy. Individual therapy, not the couples counseling Mom suggested. And I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I did to you, to us. And what conclusion did you reach? That I'm a coward. He said simply. That I let my mother manipulate me into destroying the best thing that ever happened to me. That I was too weak to stand up to her and too selfish to be honest with you. I studied his face, looking for signs of a man I'd once loved. Why, Liam? Why didn't you just talk to me if you were unhappy? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from 100 arguments. Because I wasn't unhappy with you. I was unhappy with myself, with my job, with feeling like I was living in your shadow, with never being able to measure up to your success. So, you had an affair. So, I had an affair. He agreed miserably. And I let Mom convince me it was your fault for being too ambitious, too independent, too focused on work. But none of that was true. No, it wasn't. It was all projection. I was the one who was too focused on work, on trying to prove myself to Dad, on trying to make enough money to feel like I deserved you. We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally I spoke. I would have supported you if you'd wanted to change careers. You know, if you'd wanted to do something that made you happier. I know, he said quietly. I know that now. But at the time, I couldn't see past my own insecurities, and Mom was so good at feeding them, at making me feel justified in my resentment. What do you want from me, Liam? Forgiveness, closure, a second chance? He looked up at me then, and I saw tears in his eyes. I want you to know that I know what I lost. I want you to know that Lily wasn't better than you. No one could be better than you. I want you to know that the biggest mistake of my life wasn't the affair, it was not appreciating what I had when I had it. And I want you to be happy. Really happy with someone who deserves you. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. Thank you, I said finally. I appreciate you coming here and saying that. He nodded and stood to leave. At the door, he turned back one more time. For what it's worth, Emily, you were magnificent that night at Christmas dinner. I've never seen anyone handle themselves with such grace under pressure. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and closure and the strange way life sometimes comes full circle. A year later I was dating a wonderful man named Daniel Parker. Jason is the private investigator's brother. As it turned out, Daniel was a pediatric surgeon who found my independence attractive rather than threatening, who supported my business ambitions, and who thought my story about Christmas dinner was hilarious rather than embarrassing. We were having dinner at Romano's, the same restaurant where I confronted the evidence of Liam's betrayal when Daniel asked me if I ever regretted how I'd handled the situation. Do you mean, do I regret planning it out instead of just screaming and throwing things? I asked. I mean, do you regret exposing everything in front of his whole family instead of handling it privately? I considered the question seriously. No, I said finally. Helen chose to humiliate me publicly. She thought she could corner me, embarrass me, and force me to accept her son's infidelity quietly. She thought I was weak, and you proved her wrong. I proved that actions have consequences, that manipulating people's lives for sport comes with a price, that underestimating someone because you think they're beneath you is a dangerous game. Daniel smiled and raised his wine glass. To dangerous women and the men smart enough to appreciate them. To second chances, I countered, clinking my glass against his. and to the wisdom to know when someone deserves one. As we left the restaurant that night, I thought about Lily, who'd moved back to Boston and was reportedly doing well in commercial real estate. I thought about Liam, who'd left his father's firm to teach high school math and seemed genuinely happier. I thought about Helen, who'd lost her position as the family matriarch after her behavior at Christmas dinner had finally convinced George to demand change. But mostly, I thought about myself, about the woman who'd sat at that dinner table a year ago, calmly buttering her roll while her world exploded around her. She'd been strong, strategic, and ultimately victorious. She'd also been absolutely terrified. The truth was, walking away from a 7-year marriage, even a broken one, had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. Standing up to Helen in front of all those people had taken every ounce of courage I possessed. Planning my revenge had been empowering, but executing it had been terrifying. But sometimes being terrified is exactly what you need to discover how strong you really are. And sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting out. At 24, my parents banned me from dating until I turned 28 after my sister's abusive ex. Today, I married in secret, and the truth will shock them. Following what happened to my sister, Olivia, my parents imposed precisely one rule. No dating, partnerships or romantic entanglement until I was 28, otherwise they would cut off all financial assistance and leave me on my own. They did not adopt this regulation because they were controlling or pious. They made it because they had witnessed Olivia's lover, Luke, slowly ruin her over 4 years, isolating her from friends, convinced her she was useless, and eventually sending her in the hospital with a shattered skull when she attempted to flee. She was 24 when it began, which is the same age I am now. My parents were unable to safeguard Olivia because they failed to see the warning signals until it was too late. So they chose to safeguard me by removing the chance totally. There was no dating, thus there was no risk of making the incorrect choice. Simple math in their wounded minds. The difficulty was that I had previously met Noah 7 months before the regulation was enforced. We were organic chemistry lab mates, and he had a manner of explaining complicated chemicals that reminded me of novels about little people embarking on adventures. He made me giggle throughout the most difficult semester of my pre-medical studies. And in between bonding over botched titrations and celebrating our first successful synthesis, I fell madly in love with him. Noah and I had been covertly dating for 3 months when my parents revealed the new rule 4 weeks after Olivia was released from the hospital. I went home that night and grieved in his apartment, sure that we'd have to end our relationship since I couldn't afford medical school without my parents' aid. Noah embraced me and told me that we'd work it out together, that 4 years wasn't forever, and that he'd wait as long as necessary. We grew skilled at concealing in plain sight. Noah was my study companion, tutoring buddy, and friend who happened to live near college, allowing me to remain late at the library without troubling my parents. We studied at coffee shops, sitting across from one another with textbooks open and holding hands under the table where no one could see. We spent anniversaries at his apartment with takeout and calm music, and I always made sure to leave early enough to continue my story. My roommate Maya knew the truth and continually covered for me, giving my parents updates on our girls' nights while I was cuddled up on Noah's sofa watching medical dramas and dissecting their awful representations of hospital procedures. For 3 years we maintained a delicate balance between hidden connection and public friendship, and it worked because my parents were so concerned on Olivia's rehabilitation that they didn't pay too much attention to my life. Olivia knew, however. She found it out about 10 months in when she came to see me at school and noticed how Noah and I stared at each other in the campus center. She grabbed me aside later and asked directly whether we were together, and I couldn't lie to her. I expected her to be upset or inform our parents, but instead she hugged me and said she was delighted I met someone who could make me smile like that. She made me swear to be cautious and to listen if anyone told me they spotted red flags, since she hadn't and it nearly killed her. I promised, and she became our secret keeper. The sole family member who knew the truth. She'd cover for me when I needed an alibis and send text warnings if our parents inquired too much about my social life. She stated that observing Noah and me gave her faith that good love might exist. Not every romance ended with shattered bones and restraining orders. Everything changed 7 months ago when Noah proposed. We were going up to a waterfall that he had promised to show me for months, and as we got to the top, he dropped down on one knee, holding a ring he'd been saving for since our first anniversary. He stated he understood we couldn't tell anybody and couldn't be married until my parents' artificial deadline passed. But he wanted me to know that he was prepared to wait as long as it needed. I said yes, while weeping so hard that I couldn't see the ring. He picked a modest silver band with a little sapphire since he knew I'd need something to hide. I wore it on a chain beneath my shirt, where my folks would never see it. and we began to refer to each other as fiancés in private, despite the fact that we maintained the study buddy fiction openly. We promised ourselves we'd make it official when I was 28 in 4 years, do a modest ceremony, and then stop hiding. Then Olivia became ill. She developed persistent headaches. After weeks of doctor visits and tests, they discovered a golf ball-sized brain tumor pushing against her frontal lobe. The neurosurgeon stated that it was most likely benign but needed to be removed as soon as possible to avoid irreversible harm. My parents were terribly devastated because the procedure was set for 9 weeks away. They had just regained Olivia after losing her to Luke's influence, and now they risk losing her forever to something growing within her head. I spent every evening in the hospital with them for Olivia's pre-surgery visits, and one night, after a particularly difficult meeting, Olivia brought me into the hallway alone. She informed me that she had amended her will, just in case. One of her desires was that if something happened to her during surgery, she wanted me to quit hiding and start living my life. She wanted me to marry Noah and be happy rather than waiting for some artificial limit that our devastated parents had set. I informed her that nothing was going to happen. The surgeon had estimated the success rate was around 95%, but she grasped my hand tightly and made me promise nevertheless. She said she had spent 4 years of her life locked with someone who made her unhappy, and she was not going to let me spend another 3 years hiding someone who made me happy. I promised, even though the thought of her not being okay made me sick. The procedure was set for a Monday morning in November, with a 7-hour recuperation period before we could see her. My parents took time off work and practically relocated inside the hospital's waiting room. Noah joined me and sat in the corner, pretending to study but actually providing comfort. When the surgeon finally emerged after 7 hours instead of 6, we all sprang up so quickly that we nearly knocked over chairs. He said the tumor was more intricate than the scans revealed, wrapping around blood arteries in ways that made removal difficult. But they'd gotten everything, and Olivia was stable. She awoke disoriented and nauseated, but she did wake up. Over the next 2 weeks, she healed quicker than predicted, roaming the hallways and moaning about hospital food by day 4. The diagnosis came out benign, as hoped, and the surgeon stated she wouldn't require radiation or chemotherapy, only monitoring to ensure nothing grew back. My parents sobbed in relief, perhaps thanking every deity they'd ever heard of. Olivia requested a private conversation with me the night before her release. I assumed she wanted to talk about post-surgical care, or anything practical, but instead she asked whether I recalled my pledge. I answered, of course. But she was okay now, so there was no need to rush things. She shook her head, stating that going through this had taught her that life was too brief and unpredictable to waste time waiting for ideal conditions. She advised me to marry Noah immediately, not in 4 years, and she would help me figure out how to tell our parents later. I went home that night and told Noah what Olivia had said, and we talked until 3 a.m. about whether we were bold enough to do it. We'd been playing things safe for so long that the prospect of actually opposing my parents seemed horrifying and wrong. But we couldn't deny that Olivia was correct. We'd already wasted 3 years concealing, and 4 more years felt like an eternity when we were already certain of each other. Noah offered to marry me if I was ready to risk my parents' response. I suggested, let's do it next month instead, give us time to plan something small and figure out how to break the news. We settled on a courtroom ceremony with only a few close friends, nothing flashy, simply legal, real and ours. We chose a date of January 16th, exactly 9 weeks away, and began making modest preparations that my parents would never notice. During my winter vacation, Maya assisted me in shopping for a dress. Something basic and cream-colored that I could wear again so it wouldn't look strange sitting in my closet. Noah's best buddy, Ben, consented to be our witness, and Olivia promised to show up even if it meant skipping a follow-up visit. We didn't send out invites or reserve a location since we didn't want my parents to learn anything. We just required the marriage license, 2 witnesses, and an officiant to complete a 5-minute ceremony at the courthouse downtown. It seemed like the most significant decision of my life while yet being too simple to be true. My roommate asked whether I was worried about my parents cutting me off financially, and I was horrified. Medical school was expensive, and I had already taken out loans to cover some of my tuition. Losing their assistance would result in further debt and maybe having to take time off to work, delaying my graduation. Noah, on the other hand, had already graduated from engineering school and was working at a computer business downtown. He'd been accumulating money particularly for the potential of us having to support ourselves if my parents responded negatively. He showed me his bank account one night to prove he was serious, that we could truly make it through this. He had planned our budget expecting that I would lose all parental assistance. And, while it would be tight and we'd have to be cautious, it was manageable. I sobbed when I saw those spreadsheets because they represented 3 years of him preparing for our future at a time when most people our age were still deciding what to have for supper. We convinced ourselves that maybe my parents would surprise us, that seeing me happy would be more important than following their fear-based rules. But we planned for the worst-case situation. The most difficult thing was lying to my parents every day leading up to the wedding. They'd call to check in and inquire about my classes and studies, and I'd assure them everything was okay while concealing my engagement ring beneath my shirt. My mother would discuss Olivia's recovery and how pleased she was that our family was finally recovering. I was completely oblivious that I was going to disrupt their calm. I was continuously guilty because I knew what I was doing would hurt them, even though I believed it was right. Olivia kept telling me that my guilt will vanish once I was married and happy. Our parents' anxieties did not have complete influence over my life. She had gone through hell with Luke and survived, and she felt my healthy connection with Noah deserved to be out in the open rather than hidden away. She assisted me in practicing what I would say when I ultimately informed them, going through many scenarios and reactions until I was prepared for every potential reply. Luke was released from parole 4 weeks before the wedding. Olivia received a notification from the victim services coordinator and quickly contacted me, her voice trembling so terribly that I couldn't understand her. He had only spent 4 years of his 10-year sentence due to jail overcrowding and good behavior, and now he was out with an ankle monitor and a restraining order, which Olivia dismissed as just paperwork. My parents went into full protective mode again, installing new locks and security cameras, and effectively placing Olivia under house arrest for her own safety. The restraining order indicated Luke couldn't get within 500 feet of her, but they didn't believe it. They had previously trusted the judicial system, and it had failed her. This change clearly made my situation more problematic because my parents were now extremely concerned about anything that may harm their girls. I considered postponing the wedding, but Olivia said no. She claimed Luke's exit was precisely why I needed to go through with it. To demonstrate that his acts did not provide him permanent power over our entire family. She explained that my connection with Noah had nothing to do with her experience with Luke, and that confusing the two was precisely the problem with our parents' blanket prohibition on dating. Not all men were Luke. Not all relationships ended violently. I deserved my own tale, independent from hers. She vowed she'd be in the courthouse on January 16th, even if our parents had her on lockdown, and that she'd find a way to be there for me as I had been for her after the operation. The night before the wedding, I could not sleep at all. I slept in my dorm room, looking at the ceiling as Maya slept blissfully in the next bed, and I ran over every potential scenario in my head. Best case scenario, my parents were wounded, but later reconciled. Worst case scenario, they cut me off totally, and I didn't see them again for years. The morning of January 16th dawned chilly and sunny, and I awoke at 6, despite the fact that the ceremony wasn't until 11. Maya forced me eat breakfast despite the fact that my stomach was in knots, and she helped me prepare as if we were going to combat. I put on the cream dress, basic makeup, and the ring that had been hidden beneath my shirt for 7 months. Maya snapped pictures of me in our dormitory room. When my future children inquire about my wedding day, I plan to show them these photos. Noah texted at 9:30, saying he was already at the courthouse with Ben and that the officiant will be ready anytime we arrived. I informed Maya it was time to leave, and we strolled out into the chilly January air toward downtown. My phone rang while we were 3 streets away, and I almost dropped it when I realized it was my mother calling. My hands were trembling so terribly that I couldn't answer, so Maya grabbed my arm to support me. My mother's voice was tense with barely contained worry. She questioned where I was since she had phoned my dorm room and I had not answered. I stated I was grabbing coffee with Maya before my afternoon class, which was a lie because it was only 10 a.m., and I didn't have class on Thursdays. She told me she wanted me to come home straight now because something had happened to Olivia. My heart stopped and I inquired whether Olivia was all right, if Luke had broken the restraining order, and if she was wounded. Olivia was physically okay, according to my mother, but she left the house this morning without informing anybody of her whereabouts. And, considering Mason's release on parole, they were scared something had happened to her. They'd been phoning for 3 hours and she hadn't answered the phone. I felt sick because I knew where Olivia was. She was already in the courthouse, waiting for me. And now our parents were losing their wits because they thought Mason had stolen her. I informed my mother that I'd try contacting Olivia as well and would let her know if I got through, then disconnected up before she could ask any further questions. Maya glanced at me and asked what we were doing, and I told her we were still going to the courts because Olivia was clearly determined to be there, even if it meant our parents panicked. I contacted Olivia to check if she'd noticed Mom's calls, and she instantly replied that she had, but she'd quiet her phone since today was about me, and she wasn't going to miss it. She said she'd text her mother after the ceremony to say she was at a friend's house and had lost track of time. I felt terrible that my wedding was causing this mess, but we were now 4 blocks from the courthouse, Noah was waiting, and going back now seemed impossible. Maya told me we could still postpone if I wanted, but I shook my head and continued going. The courthouse was an antique structure with marble flooring and towering ceilings that made every sound reverberate. Noah was standing at the entryway wearing a black outfit that I had never seen before. And when he saw me, his entire face brightened up, making all of the complications worthwhile. Ben was there with a camera, ready to capture everything. Olivia arrived from around a corner, wearing a blue dress and a huge smile, despite the turmoil she had caused at home. She grabbed me tightly and murmured how proud she was of me for going through with this. The officiant was a pleasant-looking woman in her 50s who led us to a little room on the 3rd floor where weddings took place. The entire area felt strange. This little chamber with fluorescent lighting was where individuals made lifelong vows between lunch breaks and parking ticket payments. The officiant asked whether we were ready, and Noah took my hand. We were suddenly uttering vows scribbled on notebook paper at 2 a.m. Noah pledged to support my aspirations, even if they involved years of medical school stress and restless residency shifts. He vowed to be patient with my problematic family and never force me to pick between him and them if it could be avoided. I swore to entirely trust him and never let my parents' concerns make me doubt what we'd accomplished together. I committed to talk rather than hide when things became tough since we were done keeping secrets after today. Noah kissed me after the officiant proclaimed us married, as Olivia, Maya and Ben celebrated quietly and respectfully in the courthouse. Ben photographed us signing the marriage certificate and it became official and irreversible. I married at 22 to someone my parents had no idea I was dating. And in a few hours, I'd have to inform them and face what happened next. We drove to a small Italian restaurant nearby for a celebratory lunch. We were 5 people in a corner booth eating spaghetti and toasting with water glasses because none of us were old enough to legally order alcohol. Olivia's phone was constantly vibrating with calls from our parents. Finally, she excused herself, calling Mom back and telling her rehearsed story about being at a friend's house working on a project. I could hear her voice from across the diner, contrite yet strong. When she returned, she stated her mother was upset but pleased that she was safe. She agreed to be home in an hour, so our wedding meal had a time constraint. We ate fast and shot more photographs outside the restaurant, hoping to capture the bizarre, fantastic, and terrible day. Noah pulled me tight and asked if I was all right, and I honestly didn't know. I was happy, married, and terrified about what would happen if I informed my parents. Olivia drew me aside before we went and told me I didn't have to tell them today if I wasn't prepared. She suggested that I wait a week or a month until Mason's parole issue calmed down. But I shook my head, saying that keeping this a secret for another day was difficult now that it was true. I wanted to be able to call Noah or my spouse rather than my study companion. I wanted to wear my ring where everyone could see it. I was done hiding, no matter how serious the repercussions were. Olivia hugged me and promised to be there when I informed them she was going to attempt to intervene and explain why this was different from her situation with Luke. She'd let them realize that Noah had been extensively vetted by her for 3 years. That she had carefully monitored our relationship for any warning signs and discovered none. I thanked her and watched her walk to the bus stop, the sister who had been through hell and was still striving for my happiness. Maya returned to university, while Noah and I proceeded to his apartment, where we sat on the couch in startled quiet, holding hands and marveling at our matching rings. We were lawfully married. The magnitude of everything hit me all at once, and I burst into tears, not because of grief, but because of how overpowering everything was. Noah drew me close and assured me that no matter how my parents responded, we'd sort it out together, just like we had with everything else. I wanted to trust him, but I was also aware that my parents' financial assistance extended beyond tuition. It provided accommodation during summer vacations, health insurance, and a safety net in case something went wrong. Losing it seemed terrible, especially with medical school applications due next year. I asked Noah whether he ever regretted picking someone with such serious familial baggage, and he answered no, that my family's pain did not define our relationship, and that he knew what he was getting into. That evening, I resolved to inform my parents as swiftly as possible, like pulling off a bandage. I contacted my mother around 6 and asked if I might come over to discuss something urgent. She instantly inquired if I was pregnant or in danger, and I answered no, just something I needed to talk about in person. She said my father would be home by 7 and I should come for dinner. I met Noah in his car and drove to my parents' house in quiet. Both of us are ready for the worst. I instructed him to stay in the car while I imparted the news, but he insisted on joining me. He said that now that we were married, we had to face things together rather than me sheltering him from the repercussions. We pulled up to my childhood house and stood in the driveway for 7 minutes, building confidence before stepping through the front door. My mother opened the door before I could knock, and her expression brightened up when she saw me before dropping when she spotted Noah behind me. She inquired who he was, and I told her he was a study companion from school who had brought me here since my car was experiencing problems. Another lie, but this one is my last since everything will be real in approximately 10 minutes. We went inside and my father was arranging the table when he looked up and made the same double take as Noah. My parents had never met him despite our 3-year relationship, since our cover story only worked if they never saw us together. Olivia was already sitting at the counter, and she gave me a positive nod. My mother asked whether Noah wanted to remain for supper, and I answered that he should since I needed to tell them something and he was involved. We all sat down at the dining room table, eating lasagna my mother had cooked, and the normalcy of the situation felt strange considering what I was going to say. My father inquired how school was doing, and I answered good before taking a big breath and telling them I wanted to confess something I had been hiding. My mother's face stiffened immediately, and she looked at Olivia as if she believed this was about Mason. I assured them that it had nothing to do with Olivia, Mason, or anything harmful, but they were not pleased. I took the chain from beneath my shirt and showed them the ring I'd been hiding for 7 months. And both of my parents glanced at it in confusion. I said that Noah and I had been dating for 3 years, had met before they enforced the no dating rule, and had continued to see each other in secret because I couldn't give up either him or their assistance for medical school. The hush that followed was oppressive. My father inquired whether I was joking, and I told him no, I was fully serious. My mother looked at Noah as if he were a stranger who had broken into her home, which he probably was. She questioned how I could be so selfish and careless given all they'd been through with Olivia. And I felt my cheeks get heated with humiliation and wrath. I explained that while I understood their worry, Noah was not Mason, and that lumping all males together because of one bad individual was unjust and unhealthy. Olivia came forward, stating that she had been aware of the connection for 3 years and had been keeping an eye out for any warning signals. Noah had treated me with nothing but respect and care the whole time. My father sprang up from the table so quickly that his chair nearly tipped over. He stated I had violated their trust and disobeyed the one rule they'd set up to keep me safe, and there would be repercussions. I told them I was aware of the implications, but they needed to grasp something first. I got out my phone and showed them images from the last 3 years. Noah and I studied at coffee cafes. He assisted me in moving into my dorm room. We volunteered together at the downtown free clinic. Olivia had covertly stolen a few of them. I am documenting a connection that my parents had no idea existed. I showed them texts from Noah, who checked in on me during midterms. Bringing me food while I was too anxious to eat. Staying up late to help me prepare for the MCAT. I showed them the chart he created to calculate how we would live if they cut me off financially. My mother was sobbing now, and I couldn't tell if it was because she was angry or for another reason. Then I said something that would alter everything. I told them Noah and I were married at the courthouse this morning. Olivia had been there as our witness, and I understood if they never wanted to talk to me again, but I was not going to apologize for pursuing happiness. The predicted explosion did not occur promptly. Instead, my father sat back down and rested his head on his hand. My mother gazed at the table for at least 4 minutes without saying anything. Olivia reached over and gripped my hand beneath the table. Finally, my father glanced up and asked Noah directly whether he knew what he had signed up for. Marrying into such a dysfunctional and difficult family. Noah caught his gaze and responded, yes. He fully realized that he had witnessed me supporting Olivia's rehabilitation and dealing with the trauma following. He also acknowledged how much I loved my family, despite the challenging circumstances. He stated he did not want to take me away from them. He wants to contribute to our collective healing. My mother inquired why we couldn't have waited 4 more years as they had requested. And I said that 4 years was arbitrary and based on fear rather than a genuine assessment of Noah's character. Olivia informed them about her brain tumor and the commitment she made me to not waste my life waiting for perfect conditions that could never materialize. She went on. Watching Luke nearly destroy her had taught her that life was too short and too unpredictable to postpone happiness. And she'd encouraged me to marry Noah now instead of hiding for 4 more years. My mother began crying harder, and I realized she was no longer angry, but rather overwhelmed, scared, and grieving the loss of control over a situation she had attempted to prevent. My father asked what we expected from them now, if we thought they'd just accept it and continue paying for medical school as if nothing had changed. I said. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect, but I hoped they could at least try to get to know Noah before deciding he was dangerous just because he existed. We sat there for another hour talking through everything, and the conversation gradually shifted from accusations to questions. My parents asked Noah about his job, family, and future plans. They asked how we'd managed to hide a relationship for 3 years, and I explained the study partner cover and Maya's constant alibis. They asked if Noah had ever pressured me or shown signs of controlling behavior, and Olivia and I both said no. That in fact, I'd been the one pushing to move faster while Noah wanted to wait and do things right. My mother asked to see the wedding photos, which Ben had already sent to my phone. When she saw pictures of me in my cream dress signing the marriage certificate, she burst into tears. She said I looked happy, which was both wonderful and heartbreaking for her. By the time we left that night, nothing had been resolved, but we were still talking. My father claimed he wasn't ready to give his approval, but he wouldn't cut me off totally, saying we'd settle out the financial issues later. My mother hugged me goodbye and murmured that she was trying to understand, and I muttered back that I realized this was difficult and apologized for the secrecy. Noah shook both of their hands and promised to take care of me, which felt strangely traditional given the circumstances. We drove back to his apartment in silence, both of us emotionally exhausted from the confrontation. That night, lying in bed next to my husband, I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt, relief that the secret had finally been revealed. My parents agreed to meet with Noah and me once a week for dinner, gradually getting to know him and learning to trust him. Olivia became our biggest advocate, constantly pointing out the differences between Noah's respectful behavior and Luke's controlling manipulation. I felt guilty for telling the truth because it had hurt my parents so much. The following few months were complicated and messy. My mom began therapy to process her trauma from Olivia's relationship, and she admitted one night that she'd been trying to prevent the wrong thing. She couldn't prevent me from being hurt, only from living. My father took a little longer to come around, but I'd catch him laughing at Noah's jokes or asking for his advice on tech problems at work. 7 months after the courthouse ceremony, we had a small reception in my parents' backyard with extended family who had no idea I was dating anyone. My mother cried the entire time, but they were happy tears. That fall, I applied to medical school, and Noah sat with me through each essay and interview prep session. I was accepted to 3 programs, and we chose the one that was closest to both of our families, because maintaining those relationships was important to both of us. My parents helped with tuition, as promised, and my father admitted he was impressed with Noah's seriousness about supporting my career. Olivia began dating again for the first time since Luke, someone kind and patient who understood her trauma and never pushed her limits. Despite my parents' rules, I don't regret getting married at the age of 24. She told me that watching my relationship with Noah gave her hope that healthy love existed, and that not everyone would hurt her the way Luke had. Luke violated his parole 9 months after his release and returned to prison for another 5 years, giving us all some breathing room. My parents' blanket ban on dating had not actually kept me safe, but it had taught me to hide and lie, which is arguably more dangerous than being open about relationships where warning signs could be detected early on. It was more difficult than waiting, and it caused pain and conflict that could have been avoided, but it also forced necessary conversations about fear, control, and healing that our family needed to have. Olivia says my rebellion gave her permission to start living again instead of letting Luke's abuse define her forever. She's now planning her own wedding to her kind, patient boyfriend, and my parents are genuinely happy for her instead of terrified. Noah surprised me with a proper honeymoon the week of our first anniversary, after we'd skipped it the first time. We went to this small beach town where we could finally be publicly married without worrying about who might see us. We walked on the beach wearing our rings in full view, and the freedom of it felt incredible. After years of hiding, my parents sent us a card congratulating us on our 1-year anniversary, which felt like final acceptance after all the struggle. My mom had written inside that she was proud of me for fighting for my happiness, even when it scared her, and that she was grateful I'd found someone who treated me with the respect I deserved. My father had added that Noah had proven himself to be exactly the kind of partner they'd hoped I'd find someday, just sooner than they'd expected. It's surreal to tell this story now because I remember how terrified I was the morning of the wedding. How certain I was that my parents would never forgive me. The reality turned out to be more complicated than I'd imagined, but also more hopeful. They didn't forgive me right away, but they also didn't abandon me. They struggled, asked questions, and gradually learned to trust again. Olivia's recovery played a huge role because watching her heal while Luke rotted in prison demonstrated that trauma does not have to define you forever. My parents had been so focused on preventing future pain that they had forgotten that people need permission to pursue joy. Getting married at 24 was not foolish or selfish, as my father first argued. It was simply a decision to begin my life rather than wait for someone else's schedule to enable it. Family comes first, my dad said. Then missed my wedding to console my 29-year-old sister. So I blocked him and sent a copy of my vows. I never imagined that my enjoyment could cause problems for others, but I guess I was mistaken. The whole thing began last spring, when I took Della to my father's birthday dinner, and I should have recognized the warning signs straight away. But I was too preoccupied with how fantastic things were going in my life to notice the storm rising around me. Ethan and I had been dating for approximately 8 months at the time, and things were going well between us. It felt natural and simple, like if we just fit together without having to force anything or walk on eggshells around each other. He made me laugh every day, and he truly listened when I talked about my job, hobbies, or whatever strange topic was on my mind. And he never made me feel like I was too much, not enough, or anything other than who I was meant to be. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, and even the silent moments felt natural, rather than unpleasant. I found myself looking forward to seeing him every day, in a manner I'd never felt with anyone before. So, when my father's 55th birthday arrived, I was delighted to introduce Ethan to more of my family, as he'd already met my mother and stepfather a few weeks before, and they adored him. My mother kept emailing me afterwards about how courteous and humorous he was, and how she could tell how happy he made me just by the way I smiled when I saw him. My stepfather actually asked Della if he wanted to go fishing with him the following weekend, which was essentially his approval, because he typically takes forever to warm up to new people. But my father's side of the family was different, and I knew that from the start, because there was always drama or tension whenever we all got together, generally centered around my half-sister Jenna, who was 28 but acted like she was 16 most of the time. Jenna had a habit of falling head over heels for guys who were clearly not right for her, like the married co-worker who dragged her along for 6 months before ghosting her, or the guy who was still living with his ex-girlfriend but claimed they were just roommates, or the one who borrowed $3,000 from her and then blocked her phone number when she asked for it back. Every time Jenna was involved in one of these disasters, she'd call my father and stepmother and cry about how she couldn't understand why this was happening to her, and they'd drop everything to rush over to her apartment with ice cream and tissues and reassurances that it wasn't her fault and she just had bad luck with men. They'd spend hours going over every text message and chat, trying to figure out what went wrong and how she could avoid it next time. And then they'd slam the guy in front of everybody who would listen, claiming that Jenna deserved so much better than these losers who didn't see her as an incredible woman. The problem was that Jenna never learned anything from these experiences, since my father and stepmother were always there to fix things for her instead of allowing her to face the consequences of her actions. They'd pay her rent when she wasted her grocery money on extravagant gifts for the person she was pursuing, and they'd co-sign loans when her credit was ruined by all the financial blunders she made while trying to impress men who didn't care about her. They'd even let her move back into their house when things were very nasty, which happened at least twice a year on a regular basis. So, when I came into my father's birthday dinner, holding Delpha's hand and smiling because I was actually thrilled to be with him, I assumed everyone would be relieved to see me doing well for once. I'd had my fair share of relationship disasters in my early 20s, including a 2-year engagement that ended when my fiancé decided he wasn't ready for marriage after all, and I'd spent a lot of time alone and working on myself before meeting Della. So I assumed my folks would be pleased that I had found someone who treated me well. But the mood at the restaurant felt strange from the time we sat down, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong at first, because everyone was courteous and asking Ethan the standard getting-to-know-you questions about his profession, hometown, and how we met. Della was being his normal charming self, sharing humorous anecdotes about his profession as a physical therapist and asking thoughtful questions about everyone else's lives, and I could tell my father enjoyed him, despite his attempts to keep things cool. Jenna was also there, and she'd just been dumped the week before by a guy she met on a dating app who turned out to be using images from 5 years ago and lying about almost everything on his site. She'd been texting me all week about how much of a nightmare the whole thing had been, how she couldn't believe she'd wasted 2 months talking to this person who wasn't even real, and how she was beginning to believe there were no good men left in the world and that she should just get a bunch of cats and stop dating altogether. I tried to be sympathetic while she told me all of this, but honestly, I was tired of having the same talk with her about how she kept getting involved with obviously problematic individuals and then appearing surprised when things didn't work out. I never said it to her explicitly because I didn't want to be mean, but I was beginning to believe that she needed to take a break from dating and figure out why she continued making the same mistakes, rather than simply repeating the same patterns with various people. Anyway, Jenna was sitting across from me at dinner, looking terrible and picking at her food while everyone else was having normal conversations. And I felt awful for her because breakups are always painful, even when you should have expected them. But then Ethan began recounting a tale about one of his patients, an old man who was learning to walk again after hip surgery, and how motivated and cheerful he was despite the fact that the recovery was extremely difficult. I was smiling at the funny moments and simply enjoying listening to him speak since he was such a terrific storyteller. That's when my stepmother Karen mentioned how lovely it must be to be so carefree and cheerful all the time, and something in her tone had me look up from my food to see what she meant. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't interpret, but it wasn't friendly, and I noticed Jenna had tears in her eyes and was looking down at her plate, as if she was trying not to cry. I felt bad because I hadn't considered how Jenna could react to my delight during a difficult time, so I tried to change the subject and asked her about her new work. But she merely shrugged and said that was all right, without elaborating. The rest of supper was unpleasant after that, with strange silences and forced chatter, and I kept noticing Karen and my father exchanging glances. Della and I departed as soon as we could respectfully, and on the way home, he inquired whether everything was all right because the atmosphere had turned peculiar near the end. I told him about Jenna's recent breakup and how I felt I'd been insensitive by being overly happy when she was down, and Ethan said he understood, but I shouldn't have to hide the fact that I was in a good relationship just to make other people feel better about their problems. I assumed that was the end of it, but the next morning, Karen texted me asking if we could talk. So I contacted her, thinking she wanted to talk about what happened at dinner and hopefully clear the air. But instead, she launched into a lengthy spiel about how she had been studying my conduct recently and was concerned that I was being insensitive to Jenna's troubles by flaunting my relationship in front of her while she was going through such a tough time. I was perplexed since I hadn't realized I was flaunting anything, and I told Karen that I was simply being myself and sharing my life with my family in the same manner I usually did. But she stated that bringing Ethan to family functions, talking about our relationship, and seeming so obviously pleased harmed Jenna, who was already unhappy with herself and her dating life, and that I needed to be more careful of her feelings. I asked Karen what she wanted me to do about it, and she said that I should tone down the public displays of affection and avoid talking about Ethan so much when Jenna was around, as well as try to be more supportive of Jenna instead of focusing solely on my own happiness. I mentioned that I had been supportive of Jenna throughout her relationship drama over the years, and that I had listened to her rant about her troubles numerous times without making it about me or my own relationships. But Karen said that wasn't the same thing, and that Jenna needed extra support from her family right now because she was going through a particularly difficult dating period, and that it would mean a lot to her if I could just be more sensitive around her until she got back on her feet. I said I'd try to be more careful of how I came across, but I didn't think it was fair to expect me to hide my happiness or pretend my relationship wasn't going well simply to save Jenna's feelings. That conversation bugged me for days afterward because something about it felt strange, but I couldn't pinpoint what was wrong with Karen's reasoning. I discussed it with Ethan, and he said it sounded like they were asking me to shrink myself to meet Jenna's difficulties, which was unhealthy for everyone involved. But I didn't want to upset my family, so I tried to be more discreet about my connection when I was with them, even if it seemed strange and artificial. The next family event was my cousin's graduation party a few weeks later, which I attended alone because Della had to work that weekend. Karen and my father, however, continued to give me strange looks whenever I smiled or laughed at someone's joke. Jenna was there with a new guy she'd started seeing, who was nice enough at first, but as the afternoon progressed, it became clear that he was one of those individuals who believes he's wiser than everyone else and must correct or dispute anything anyone says in conversation. I noticed Jenna hanging on every word this guy said, even when he was being condescending to others, and I could see my father and Karen exchanging concerned looks, but they didn't say anything to her about it at the moment. Instead, after the party, Karen approached me and said she'd noticed that I was much more comfortable and pleasant when Della wasn't present, and that it might be best if I attended family occasions alone for a while, until Jenna settled into her new relationship. I was startled because that was not what we had agreed on at all, and I informed Karen that I thought we were only talking about my being more sensitive, not completely removing Delta from family events. But she stated that his presence seemed to make things harder for Jenna, that it would only be temporary, until she felt more sure about her own dating life, and that it would really benefit the family dynamic if I could just go along with it for the time being. I answered no, since Ethan was my partner, and I was not going to treat him like a filthy secret just because Jenna couldn't stand seeing other people in happy relationships. Karen became indignant, saying I was being selfish by putting my own desires ahead of my sister's mental well-being, and that if I truly cared about Jenna, I would be prepared to make this modest sacrifice to help her get through a difficult period. But it didn't feel tiny to me. And I informed Karen that Jenna was 28 years old and needed to learn how to cope with her own difficulties rather than asking everyone else to restructure their lives around her emotions. Karen said that I was being unkind and unsympathetic, and that Jenna had always suffered with relationships and required support from her family rather than judgment and condemnation. I remembered that Jenna was still struggling because my father and Karen never let her face the repercussions of her poor decisions, and that constantly swooping in to rescue her or make everyone else accommodate her problems was not helping her develop or learn anything. Karen thought that was a terrible thing to say about my own sister, and she couldn't believe I was being so cold and selfish when Jenna needed me the most. Karen accused me of being envious of the attention Jenna received from my father, and I pointed out that I was attempting to live my own independent adult life, rather than continuously causing problems that necessitated family intervention. By the end, we were both fairly furious, and Karen suggested that I take some time to consider what kind of sister and daughter I wanted to be, and that I was welcome to return to family activities when I was ready to be more supportive and less self-centered. I left feeling like, because I couldn't see how wanting to bring my boyfriend to family functions made me selfish or unsupportive. I'd been patient with Jenna's ongoing relationship catastrophes for years, and I'd never made her feel guilty about her decisions, even when they were obviously awful ones that anyone could see coming from a mile away. When I informed Della what had happened, he was upset on my behalf, claiming that my family was being utterly unfair and deceitful. He said it sounded like they had an unhealthy relationship in which Jenna became the focus of attention anytime she had a problem, and anyone who didn't engage in that drama was seen as nasty or unsupportive, which wasn't fair to me. I didn't hear from my father or Karen for nearly 2 weeks following the incident, which was uncommon because we usually spoke or texted at least once a week. I was waiting for one of them to apologize or at least try to work something out, but my phone remained silent, except for sporadic texts from Jenna, whining about her new boyfriend and how he was beginning to show his true colors. Finally, my father contacted me one evening and said he'd been thinking about everything that had happened, and he agreed with Karen that I'd been insensitive to Jenna's position and that some time away would be beneficial to everyone. He added that, until I was ready to be more aware of Jenna's feelings and more supportive of the family as a whole, I shouldn't attend family events since my attitude was causing friction and made things difficult for everyone else. I asked him if he was truly advising me not to attend family occasions because I was too happy in my relationship, and he replied that wasn't the point, but that my behavior had been selfish and unkind, and that actions had repercussions. I corrected myself. Fine, if that's how he felt about it, then I would respect his wishes and stay away from family events, but I thought he was making a huge mistake and prioritizing Jenna's inability to handle her own problems over his relationship with me. He said that if I was going to be stubborn and refuse to recognize how my actions were affecting others, perhaps some space might help me gain perspective on the matter. I replied that perhaps he was correct about the distance because I was weary of being made to feel guilty for having a healthy relationship when everyone else was so focused on enabling Jenna's dysfunction. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my car in the parking lot outside my office and cried for about 20 minutes because I couldn't believe that my own father was essentially expelling me from the family because I refused to pretend to be unhappy in order to make my half-sister feel better about her poor life choices. It felt like a surreal universe where being happy and stable was regarded as a character flaw and producing perpetual drama was rewarded with attention and support. Della found me when I arrived home, took one look at my face, and drew me into an embrace without asking what was wrong. I recounted to him the entire discussion as he caressed my back and let me cry into his shirt. He said that my family was toxic, that I deserved better than to be treated as if my happiness was a burden or inconvenience to others, and that this forced separation from them might be a good thing, because it would give me some space to see how messed up the whole dynamic was. I thought he might be right, because the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my father and Karen had always treated Jenna as if she was fragile and required constant protection from reality, while expecting me to be self-sufficient and handle my own problems without any support or recognition. When I experienced relationship problems in the past, they'd listen politely for a few minutes before changing the subject or giving me general advice about how things would work out in the end. But with Jenna, they'd spend hours dissecting every aspect and devising complex strategies to make her feel better. Over the next several weeks, I found myself enjoying the break from family drama since I didn't have to worry about walking on eggshells around Jenna or monitoring my conduct to make sure I wasn't being too happy or successful in a way that would hurt her feelings. Ethan and I went to concerts, tried new restaurants, and went on weekend vacations without worrying about if any of it would make Jenna feel awful about her own life, and it felt liberating to simply exist without constantly second-guessing myself. My mother observed that I was more comfortable when we had lunch one Saturday, and when I told her about what had transpired on my father's side of the family, she was shocked. She said that forcing me to suppress my delight in order to protect someone else's feelings constituted emotional manipulation, and that healthy families celebrate one another's accomplishments, rather than considering them as threats to someone else's well-being. She also mentioned that Jenna was nearly 30 years old, and had been repeating the same patterns of relationship turmoil for over a decade, and that it might be time for her to take responsibility for her own decisions, rather than relying on others to manage her emotions for her. My mother said she'd been watching this dynamic play out for years, and was always concerned that my father and Karen were doing Jenna more harm than good by never allowing her to face the natural repercussions of her decisions. Meanwhile, Jenna kept texting me to complain about her new guy, who had shown to be just as problematic as the others, but in different ways. He was financially reckless and wanted her to pay for everything, and he had a fury that he vented on service personnel and those he deemed beneath him. He began to make comments about how she should dress and act that made her uncomfortable, but she didn't know how to respond. I was growing upset with these texts since it was so obvious that she was seeing another loser, but I knew if I brought it out, she'd become defensive and accuse me of being unsupportive, just like my father and Karen did. So I usually just responded with generic phrases like, "That sounds hard," and "You deserve better," which felt false but appeared to be what she was looking for. After about 6 weeks of this forced arrangement from my father's side of the family, Ethan and I were eating dinner at our favorite restaurant when he suddenly got serious and said he needed to ask me something important. My pulse raced because I assumed he was ready to end our relationship, but instead he pulled out a ring box and asked if I wanted to spend the rest of our lives making each other happy. I shouted yes before he could finish the question, since being with Ethan had shown me what it was like to be truly seen, respected, and supported by another person, and I couldn't imagine wanting to build a life with anyone else. The ring was ideal, simple and lovely without being overly flashy, and when I put it on, it felt like it had always belonged on my finger. We spent the rest of dinner chatting about our future plans, such as the house we wanted to buy, the trips we wanted to take, and the type of life we wanted to live. Everything felt conceivable and exhilarating in ways I'd never experienced before. We agreed that we didn't want a long engagement since we were both ready to begin our married lives together, and that we'd rather have a modest, personal wedding with only the people who truly meant to us than a large, expensive production that would stress us out for months. When we went home that night, I began building a mental list of the individuals I wanted to call with the news, and I saw that my father and Karen were not on it. The prospect of telling them about the engagement filled me with dread rather than excitement, because I knew they'd find a way to make it about Jenna and how my happiness was insensitive to her struggles, or they'd use it as an opportunity to lecture me about how I needed to fix our relationship before moving on with my life. I decided to contact my mother first, and when I told her the news, she yelled with pleasure, began crying happy tears, and requested to view the ring via video chat. She said she knew Ethan was the one for me from the moment she met him, that she'd never seen me as happy and at ease with anybody as I was with him, and that she couldn't wait to officially welcome him into the family. Then I contacted my best friend, who had introduced me to Ethan in the first place, and she said she'd been waiting for this call for months since it was so evident that we were meant to be together. We talked for an hour on the phone about wedding plans, venues, and outfits, and she quickly offered to be my maid of honor, which made me weep because I was so thankful to have people in my life who were genuinely excited for my happiness. But when the time came to call my father, I kept putting it off because I didn't want to cope with his difficult reaction. I knew that announcing my engagement would turn into a discussion about how I was being disrespectful to Jenna, how I should have waited until she was in a better place in her own life, or how I was being selfish by going ahead with my plans when our family relationships were strained. Finally, Ethan asked why I appeared nervous about telling my father about the engagement, and I said that I was concerned about how he and Karen would respond after everything that had happened in the previous several months. Ethan stated that their view should not matter when it came to our desire to marry, and that if they were unable to be happy for us, it was their problem, not ours. He was correct, but it still hurt to know that my own father would most likely find a way to make my engagement about someone else's troubles, rather than simply being glad that his daughter had met someone who loved her. I realized I'd been thinking that the engagement would somehow heal our relationship, that such plainly happy news would snap him out of whatever bizarre mindset he'd been in, and remind him that he was meant to care about my happiness as well. But when I eventually summoned the nerve to call him a few days later, the conversation went precisely as terribly as I had anticipated. He congratulated me in a cold, unenthusiastic tone, then immediately began asking questions about the time frame, whether we were planning a large wedding, and how much it would cost. as if he was interviewing me for a job rather than celebrating with his daughter. When I told him we were planning a small ceremony in the fall with only close relatives and friends, he replied it sounded wonderful. But then he paused, saying he hoped I understood that the matter with our family was still unresolved, and that having everyone together for a wedding would be unpleasant because there were still hurt feelings and unresolved issues. I asked him what he meant, and he said that Karen was still upset about our last conversation, that Jenna was going through a particularly difficult time right now, again, because her most recent relationship had ended badly, and that we should consider waiting until things were more settled before planning a big family celebration. I couldn't believe he was recommending I postpone my wedding because Jenna had split up with another lousy guy. So I told Della that we weren't going to put our life on hold while we waited for Jenna to get her act together, and that if my father and Karen couldn't accept my engagement, maybe they shouldn't come to the wedding at all. He became defensive and stated that that was not what he was saying, but that timing was important and that it would be best for everyone if we could handle our family issues before adding additional stress to the situation. I said that the only family issue was that he and Karen had determined that my happiness posed a threat to Jenna's well-being, and that I would not apologize for having a healthy relationship or wanting to marry someone who treated me well. The debate devolved from there, with my father accusing me of being tough and uncompromising, and me pointing out that I was the only one who had been forced to compromise anything, whilst Jenna continued to receive unlimited support and accommodation for her stupid decisions. In conclusion, he suggested that if that's how I felt about it, maybe we should all take some time to cool off before continuing to discuss it. I hung up feeling like, wah, because I couldn't believe my own father was basically telling me that my engagement was inconvenient for him. Della found me crying in the kitchen and hugged me while I told him what had occurred. He stated that we were going to have the most beautiful wedding with the people who truly loved and supported us, and that anyone who couldn't enjoy our happiness didn't deserve to be there. Over the next few weeks, I began arranging the wedding with my mother, best friend, and a few other close friends, and it was astonishing how much easier everything felt without having to accommodate people who didn't want to be there in the first place. We located the ideal location at a tiny winery outside of town, and we planned an intimate and meaningful ceremony rather than having to handle a slew of problematic family relationships. I kept expecting that my father would call to apologize and want to be included in the wedding planning, but my phone remained silent, save for the occasional text from Jenna about whatever new catastrophe was brewing in her life. She had finally split up with her financially irresponsible boyfriend. But now she was obsessed with a guy from her gym who hardly noticed her existence. And she was confident that if she could just figure out how to approach him, he'd understand they were destined to be together. The entire situation was so predictable and frustrating that I ended up deleting her texts without responding because I was tired of being expected to provide emotional support for her self-created problems while receiving no support or recognition for the positive things in my own life. As the wedding date approached, I had to make the difficult decision to send invites to my father and Karen, since part of me hoped they'd come to their senses and want to be a part of this special day in my life. However, when I called to inform them of the offer, my father stated that he and Karen had discussed it, and that they did not believe it would be proper for them to attend, given the present status of our relationships. I asked him if he was seriously refusing to attend his own daughter's wedding because I would not agree to hide my happiness to make Jenna feel better, and he said it wasn't about that, but that there were still unresolved issues between us that needed to be addressed before we could move forward. I stated that the only issue was his refusal to treat me with the same respect and support as he did Jenna, and that if he was ready to miss my wedding over it, that told all I needed to know about his priorities. He claimed I was being dramatic and making things more complicated than they needed to be, and that if I was prepared to apologize for how I handled things and commit to being more supportive of Jenna in the future, we could work it out. I stated that I had nothing to apologize for, and that I would not beg him to care about my happiness when he had made it apparent that Jenna's sentiments were more important to him than his connection with me. He closed the talk by expressing that he hoped I'd reevaluate my attitude and that the door was always open if I wanted to make things right, but he couldn't support my choices because I was being so selfish and disrespectful to the rest of the family. I responded that we'd have to agree to differ about what family support looked like, and that I hoped he'd be satisfied with his decision when he explained why he wasn't at his daughter's wedding. When I informed Ethan about the talk, he claimed that my father was manipulative and emotionally abusive, and that I deserved so much better than to be treated as if my pleasure was dependent on making everyone else comfortable. He promised that our wedding would be beautiful because it would be filled with people who truly loved us and wanted us to be happy, and that we would begin our marriage surrounded by true support rather than destructive turmoil. He was definitely correct, since our wedding day was the most beautiful and happiest day of my life. My mother escorted me down the aisle because my father had chosen not to attend, and she looked so pleased and happy that I nearly burst into tears before I ever reached Della. The ceremony was everything we hoped for, intimate and meaningful, surrounded by people who were really happy to celebrate our love. My mother gave an incredible speech at the reception about how she had watched me develop into a lady who deserved to be treasured and supported, and how pleased she was that Ethan had entered my life to love me the way I deserved to be loved. My best friend mentioned how evident it was that Ethan and I were meant to be together, and how she had never seen two people more perfectly suited to make each other happy. The entire day felt exactly as a wedding should. A celebration of love and commitment surrounded by people who only wanted to see us prosper and grow together. There was no drama, stress, or anyone dictating how we should feel or act. Only pure joy, love, and support from those who cared the most. However, the aftermath of the wedding revealed an entirely new level of familial dysfunction that I had not anticipated. A few days after we returned from our honeymoon, I began receiving angry texts from Karen about how hurt and betrayed she felt that we had gone ahead with the wedding without doing more to include them, and how she couldn't believe I was willing to destroy our family relationships over such a minor disagreement. She indicated that Jenna was upset to see the wedding images on social media, that it was cruel of me to display my happiness while she was going through a tough time, and that I should have been more sensitive to how my actions could affect others. I was astounded that, despite missing my wedding totally, she was still attempting to make it about Jenna's feelings, rather than admitting that perhaps they had made a mistake by not attending. I responded that I had not harmed any family relationships, but that I had simply stopped allowing my happiness to be held hostage by someone else's inability to deal with their own problems, and that if they were devastated about missing my wedding, they should have made different priorities. I said that I had invited them to be a part of the most significant day of my life, but they had declined since supporting me would have required them to accept that their treatment of me was incorrect. Karen responded with a message about how I had changed and become selfish and cold, how the person I used to be would never have prioritized my personal demands over my family's needs, and how disappointed she was in the woman I had become. She explained that Jenna had always looked up to me and appreciated my strength, but that now she felt rejected and abandoned by her own sister, and that I needed to accept responsibility for the anguish I had caused. As I read that message, I understood Karen was living in a parallel reality in which I was meant to be happy for being treated as a second-class family member, and where setting boundaries and asking basic respect was somehow selfish and cruel. She honestly appeared to believe that I should have been honored to give up my own happiness and wedding day to accommodate Jenna's emotional concerns, and that my refusal to do so made me a terrible person. I chose not to respond to her message because there was no use in attempting to reason with someone who was so concerned in preserving this bizarre relationship in which Jenna's troubles were everyone else's burden. Instead, I disabled her phone number and focused on enjoying my new marriage and the life Della and I were creating together. My father contacted me a few weeks later, and I assumed he was going to apologize and try to rebuild our relationship. Instead, he launched into a lecture about how my behavior since the wedding had been wrong and hurtful, and how I needed to contact Karen and Jenna to apologize for the anguish I had caused them. He claimed that family was supposed to be more important than everything else, and that my decision to cut them off over this argument demonstrated that I had lost sight of what truly mattered in life. I questioned him if he truly believed that family was the most important thing, and if so, why he was ready to miss his own daughter's wedding rather than accept that he had treated me unfairly. I explained that I had always prioritized family, but that I had finally recognized that the relationship had to be reciprocal, and that I was not going to continue sacrificing my well-being to preserve connections with individuals who did not value or respect me. He claimed I was overreacting, that no one had asked me to sacrifice my well-being, but that having a family sometimes required putting other people's needs ahead of your own, and that my failure to do so when Jenna needed help showed that I was selfish and immature. I explained that I had been putting other people's needs ahead of my own for years, and that when I asked for basic attention and respect in return, I was told I was unreasonable and demanding. For the next 20 minutes, the talk went in circles, with him maintaining that I was wrong and needed to rectify things, and me pointing out that I wasn't the one who caused the scenario in the first place. Finally, I told him that I loved him, but that I wasn't going to keep having the same debate, and that if he wanted to be in a relationship with me, he needed to realize that I was an adult who deserved to be treated with the same care and attention that he did Jenna. He stated that he hoped I'd finally come to my senses and see what I was throwing away, and that he'd be waiting for me to apologize and put things right when I was ready to be rational. I said that I wasn't throwing anything away, but that I was tired of receiving crumbs when I deserved a place at the table, and that if he was waiting for me to apologize for wanting to be happy, he would be waiting a long time. Della told me that he was proud of me for standing up for myself and for us, and that he had watched me struggle with this poisonous dynamic for months without knowing how to help me realize that I deserved better. He added that individuals who truly loved me would never ask me to shrink or hide my happiness to make them feel better, and that anyone who couldn't appreciate my accomplishments wasn't really my family in any meaningful way. Over the next 6 months I received frequent updates on Jenna's life via relatives and social media, and the pattern remained consistent. She'd gotten engaged with the gym guy, who turned out to be married, and when that predictably imploded, she'd gone on to this older divorced guy she met at a coffee shop, who had 3 kids, 2 ex-wives, and a mountain of baggage that should have been obvious from space. Each new calamity followed the same pattern, with Jenna crying to my father and Karen about how she couldn't understand why these things kept happening to her, and then stopping everything to run over and console her and figure out what was wrong. According to my cousin, who still spoke with everyone, my father had been paying Jenna's rent for the past 3 months since she had become so emotionally overwhelmed by her most recent breakup that she was unable to focus at work and had been written up numerous times for poor performance. Meanwhile, Ethan and I were settling into married life in the best way possible, and each day I felt more happy that I'd chosen to prioritize my own pleasure over continuing to facilitate my family's dysfunction. We purchased a little house with a garden so Ethan could grow tomatoes and herbs, and we got a rescue dog named Benny, who made us laugh every day with his crazy nature and boundless energy. But around 8 months after the wedding, the relative tranquility was broken when my father contacted me at work one day, and I could tell by his tone that something was really wrong. He explained that Jenna had been hospitalized following what appeared to be a suicide attempt, and that she had left a note stating that she couldn't stand feeling like such a failure in comparison to everyone else, and that she was weary of being the family disappointment while I had the perfect life. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck because, even though Jenna and I had our disagreements, I'd never wanted anything bad to happen to her, and the thought that she might have killed herself because of something related to me was upsetting. I asked my father whether she was okay and which hospital she was in, and he replied she was stable, but the doctors wanted to keep her for observation for a few days to ensure her safety. Then he explained that he was calling because Jenna had specifically requested me, that she wanted to talk to me about everything that had happened between our families, and that perhaps this crisis could be an opportunity for all of us to come together and heal the schism that had been separating us. I responded, of course I would come to the hospital if Jenna wanted to see me, because regardless of our disagreements, she was still my half-sister and I cared about her well-being. But as I drove to the hospital, I developed a creeping sense of dread about the entire situation, because something about my father's tone felt deceptive in a manner that I couldn't quite explain. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my father and Karen in the waiting room, looking worn and exhausted. Karen burst into tears when she saw me and said she was so delighted I'd come because Jenna desperately wanted to see me. My father hugged me and suggested that perhaps this dreadful event could help us rediscover what was truly important and bring our family back together. I asked to see Jenna, and a nurse led me to a room where she lay in bed, pale and fatigued. When she spotted me, she burst into tears and apologized for everything that had happened, saying she'd been so jealous of my happiness that she'd made herself sick trying to compete with something she couldn't have. She said that seeing me get married and begin this beautiful life with Ethan made her realize how empty and pathetic her own life was, and that she'd been spiraling for months trying to find someone who would love her the way Ethan loved me, but that every relationship only made her feel worse about herself. She stated that the night she took the pills, she had been looking at our wedding images online, and felt as if she would never be good enough to deserve such happiness. I felt bad listening to her talk like this since I'd never want my happiness to bring anyone misery, and I told her that her worth as a person had nothing to do with her relationship status, and that she deserved love and happiness just as much as everyone else. I expressed my regret that she had been struggling so much, and that I hoped she had felt comfortable talking to me about what she was going through, rather than allowing it to escalate. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. My father and Karen had told her that I had said I thought she was pathetic and would never find anyone because she was too needy and desperate, and that I had been laughing about her relationship problems with Ethan, and making fun of her behind her back. I was astonished because I had never spoken anything like that about Jenna to anybody, and the idea that my father and Karen would lie to her about something so heinous was almost inconceivable. I assured Jenna that I had never said those things about her, and that whoever told her otherwise was lying. I also asked her where she obtained that information. She looked perplexed and explained that Karen had informed her about a conversation she had overheard between me and Ethan, in which we were allegedly making jokes about Jenna's dating disasters and discussing how uncomfortable it was to be connected to someone so needy for male attention. I was enraged because I realized Karen had completely made up this narrative to make Jenna feel even worse about herself, and to portray me as some kind of villain who was mocking her agony. I informed Jenna that the conversation she described had never occurred, that I would never say such things about her or anyone else, and that Karen had lied to her for reasons I didn't understand. Jenna looked perplexed and explained that Karen seemed so convinced about what she'd heard, and that it felt accurate because of how accomplished and happy I appeared in comparison to how miserable she was. I explained that my happiness had nothing to do with her troubles, and that comparing our lives was unfair to both of us, because we were separate individuals with different situations and choices. I spent about an hour with Jenna, going through some of her emotions and attempting to help her understand that her worth was not dictated by her relationship status, and that she has many positive characteristics and talents that had nothing to do with whether she was dating someone. By the time I left, she appeared a little more stable, saying she was glad I had gone to see her and that we could work on mending our connection after she was out of the hospital. But when I returned to the waiting area, I was furious at what Karen had done, and I confronted her about the lies she'd told Jenna about me allegedly ridiculing her. Karen became defensive, claiming that she had never told Jenna anything like that, and that Jenna may have misunderstood something or become confused due to her emotional state. I stated that Jenna had been extremely explicit about what Karen had allegedly overheard, and that it was clear that someone had purposefully supplied her false information to make her feel bad about herself and turn her against me. Karen told me that I was being paranoid, that no one was trying to turn anyone against me, and that I should focus on supporting Jenna rather than causing extra drama during a family crisis. My father jumped in and said that this was not the time or place for accusations and arguments, and that we all needed to band together to support Jenna rather than fight each other. I stated that while I wanted to support Jenna, I was not going to stand by while someone lied about me to manipulate her emotions, and that whoever told her those things about me owed her an apology and an explanation. The entire situation escalated into a massive argument right there in the hospital waiting room, with Karen accusing me of being selfish and making Jenna's crisis about myself, and me pointing out that someone in this family had a history of lying and manipulating situations to create drama, and that Jenna's emotional state was being used as a weapon against me, just as it had always been. Finally, my father suggested that if I couldn't be supportive during this tough time, I should leave, because Jenna didn't need the stress of family disagreement while she was recovering. I stated that I had been nothing but supportive of Jenna, but that I would not allow anyone to use her weakness as a reason to lie about me or manipulate the situation for their own benefit. I left the hospital feeling as if I'd been thrown through a meat grinder, because everything seemed to be set up to make me look like the bad guy and force me back into the dysfunctional family dynamic from which I'd worked so hard to break free. They seemed to have used Jenna's true emotional distress to suck me back into their web of deceit and guilt, and I felt awful about it all. When I came home and informed Ethan what had happened, he was enraged by the falsehoods Karen had told Jenna about me, and he described using someone's suicide attempt to manipulate family connections as one of the most vile things he'd ever heard of. He stated that, even if Jenna's crisis was genuine, the way my father and Karen handled it was abusive and inappropriate, and that I should not feel bad about refusing to join in their poisonous games. Over the next few days, my father called me several times, requesting me to return to the hospital and spend more time with Jenna, saying she had asked for me and that my presence seemed to make her feel better. But every time I visited, Karen would be there too, making these passive-aggressive remarks. After about a week of this, I told my father that I would continue to support Jenna as much as I could, but that I was not going to pretend that the problems in our family relationships were my fault, and that using Jenna's crisis to manipulate me into accepting blame for things I did not do was exacerbating the situation for everyone. He said that no one was attempting to manipulate anyone, and that if I truly cared about Jenna, I would be willing to accept responsibility for my role in her mental collapse. I stated that I loved Jenna deeply for Jenna, but that I was not responsible for her mental health or relationship issues, and that claiming differently was unjust to both of us. Jenna was released from the hospital a few days later, with a plan for outpatient treatment and medication management, and I made it a point to check in with her on a regular basis to see how she was doing and offer whatever assistance I could. But I also kept my distance from my father and Karen, because I could tell they were still attempting to use the incident to guilt me into believing their version of events and apologizing for things I had not done. I'd finally had enough. I told him that despite how they treated me, I had attempted for months to keep a relationship with them, and that I had continued to assist Jenna even after they used her crises to manipulate me. But I'd had enough of being the family's scapegoat while they framed themselves as the victims of my perceived selfishness. He told me that I was being dramatic, that family was more important than pride, and that if I left them over this, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I stated that the only regret I had was investing so much time and energy attempting to preserve connections with individuals who were determined to see me as the villain no matter what I did, and that I was finally ready to accept that some people would never change. That was my final conversation with my father, and it has been more than a year since then. Jenna and I text occasionally, and she's doing much better in therapy. She's also started setting some boundaries with our father and Karen, which is helping her develop more independence and self-awareness. Parents and sister turned my daughter away on Christmas. No room at the table, they said. So I evicted them from the $250,000 home I paid for. At Christmas, I was working a double shift at the emergency room. My parents and sister informed my 16-year-old daughter that there was no place for her at the table. She had to drive home alone and celebrate Christmas in an empty house. I didn't create a scene. Instead, I took action. The next morning, my parents discovered a note at their door and screamed. On Christmas Eve, I arrived home about 11:45 p.m., completely exhausted. I'd done compressions on a man who claimed he was simply fatigued. He was also blue. That type of change. So when I spotted Sophie's boots near the entryway, my initial assumption was that someone was bleeding. Then I noticed her coat drooping against the armrest, her overnight bag still zipped, and her curled up on the couch in that tight, unnatural sleep position, as if she didn't trust the furniture. I waited there waiting for reasoning to catch up. She was meant to attend my folks' overnight tradition. She begged to drive herself only once, proud of her recently acquired license. She even departed early to be extra courteous. My husband and I were both working late nights, so the plan seemed reasonable, until it didn't. Sophie, I spoke softly. She opened her eyes immediately, like if she hadn't truly slept. Hey, why are you here? She sat up gently. They said there wasn't room. I blinked. Where is the room? At the table. Her voice broke midway through. She attempted to disguise it with another shrug. Did not work. They said they didn't expect me, and that there were already too many people. Grandma explained that she couldn't simply pull up another chair at the last minute. She appeared anxious, as if I were adding to her workload. You got there on time, right? Yeah. Right on time. She opened the door and appeared confused, as if I'd arrived for the wrong holiday. She stopped, then added. She also stated that there were no beds remaining. There was a backup excuse. She stated that they did not want me driving back late, but they also did not know where else to put me. So I left. Did someone offer to drive you home? Nope. I stared at her. Were you at least allowed to eat? Another shrug. The table was full. Maya sat in my customary seat. Grandpa spoke to her as if she were royalty. Nobody looked at me. Aunt Rachel nodded as Grandma added, "It's just a full house this year." So I left. She glanced at the table and said, "I made toast." I turned to see it. A single slice on a paper towel, cold and slightly curved. There's half a banana next to it. It was her Christmas supper. I felt a coil in my chest, not rage, not yet, just that cold, crystalline sensation before the shatter. I wasn't hungry anyway, she explained. Not really. That was when her eyes began to flood. She battled it. God, she tried. She looked up, blinked hard and bit her lip, as if she could chew her way out of the emotion. They made it seem like I'd imposed, she said quietly. Like showing up after it was planned was rude. And then she cried quietly and slowly, like a faucet that won't turn off. I was going to bring a pie, she said, but I thought they'd have enough food already. I sat next to her and placed my arm around her shoulders. She leaned forward without hesitation, as if she was supporting herself out of hate. After a time, she wiped her nose against her sleeve. I know they don't like you, she told me. But I thought... She cut herself off. You thought you were just the kid, not part of it. She nodded. They didn't even say it meanly, she explained. Just as if it was a practical matter. Like I was a folding chair that they didn't have room for. I did not go to bed right away. I sat in the kitchen, looking at her still zipped bag. She wrapped it so carefully, chose the clothing my mother mentioned she loved, and brought a small tin of cookies she prepared herself. I opened the refrigerator. There was nothing spectacular there. We had not prepared a backup Christmas. Why should we? We trusted them. That's the part I couldn't get over. Not the chili cheese toast, or the scarcity of food. Not to mention that she drove home alone in the dark. They looked her in the eyes. This sweet, uncomfortable, brave girl who arrived on time with cookies and a smile, and said with 28 people inside, "There's no room for you." They did not mean no room. They were referring to someone other than you. The next morning my spouse arrived home. Sophie was still sleeping. I informed him what had happened. He stood there for a long period before saying, "So, what do we do now?" I didn't respond. Not yet. But I already knew. Because there's turning the other cheek and then turning down a 16-year-old who simply wants to be included. They picked the latter. I didn't create a scene. I took action instead. The next morning, my parents discovered a note at their door and screamed. And began screaming. I don't recall the first time I was nicknamed the weird one. Probably before I understood what the term meant. When I was 6, I discovered a dead bird and asked if I could dissect it. Not to be creepy, but I wanted to know how it worked. My mother smacked the kitchen counter and asked, "Jesus, Emma, what is wrong with you?" My sister Rachel screamed and informed everyone that I was attempting to build a zombie. I was grounded for scaring her. That kind of established the tone. I adored anatomy books, wanted a microscope for Christmas, and inquired about blood flow during supper. At school, I was the one who raised her hand. In my family, that was enough to get you dubbed a show-off. Nobody else attended college. Most did not complete high school on their first try. I was the only one who studied during the commercials. By the time I was 12, my father had started joking, half joking, that I wasn't really his. "Too smart to be mine," he'd say. Then he would laugh. I once overheard him arguing with my mother while they thought I was sleeping. He inquired whether she had ever cheated on him, saying he had always wondered because I didn't resemble anyone in the family. I didn't get much sleep that night. Never inquired about it. Still have not. By high school, Rachel had mastered her position as the golden kid. She was noisy, likable, average in school, and an expert at spinning every failure into a narrative. People adored her. She understood how to cry on cue and made it clear to everyone that she was looking out for me, the poor, awkward one who couldn't take jokes. She used to call me doctor, freak in front of others. She changed it to doctor. Moneybags after I became a doctor. So, progress. When I received the scholarship, the entire ride, my folks were unusually silent. There is no celebration. No hugs. My mother inquired as to whom I expected to marry, as men dislike women who appear to be wiser than they are. I told her I might marry myself. She did not laugh. They did not give me a penny. I waited tables in medical school, performed shifts no one wanted, and returned home with painful feet and burnout in my bones. Meanwhile, my family believed I was living a dream. They made no visits. Years later, following my second residency, I landed my first steady job, which made me feel like I wasn't drowning. My husband and I met during an overnight shift, very romantic if you consider shared tiredness charming, and finally relocated to a place where we could afford more than instant noodles. And that's when the calls began. Can you help with the electricity bill? Can you co-sign the lease? Can you speak with a doctor friend regarding Uncle Pete's back lump? I did everything I could, most of it without hesitation. When my parents approached retirement, far too soon and with little savings, I stepped in. They had never bought a home, always rented, poor credit, terrible luck, or whatever the excuse of the year was. So I purchased a small 2-bedroom house and handed them the keys. I told them it was a gift and that I would handle the mortgage. The house is in my name, yet they live there as if it was theirs. Rent-free. The majority of utilities are covered. Medical issues, I have insurance coverage. Yes, I have never said no, until recently. Rachel called some months ago. Maya, her daughter, the one who can do no wrong, had been admitted to a top STEM summer camp. Rachel said, "She's got your brain," as if it were a compliment. This could change her life. I inquired how much. 1,200, she explained, but it's worth it. And you, among all people. That's when I stopped listening. Sophie never attended a summer camp like that. Not because she couldn't, she never asked. She's practical and thoughtful. She wouldn't conceive of demanding that much money from me, even if she could have. I told Rachel no, respectfully but firmly. I explained that I was already financing our parents' mortgage, medical payments, and emergencies. Perhaps she could apply for financial aid or a payment plan. Her tone changed quickly. "Wow, must be good to have everything and still be so frugal. She's your niece. You're just jealous that Maya is achieving success." That last one was funny. Or would have been if I hadn't heard my mother say something similar a week later when she assumed I was out of earshot. Apparently, I was holding Maya back, just as I had always done with Rachel, by being the brilliant one who made everyone else look awful. You already know this since you exist. I didn't resist it, explain, or justify. I simply said no. And I intended it. This was 3 weeks before Christmas. Sophie was pleased to attend Christmas dinner and claimed she felt grown up being trusted to drive herself. She packed an overnight bag and even wrapped small gifts for her younger cousins. I told her I would see her in the morning and asked her to text me when she arrived. She did. Everything appeared perfect. Hours later, I walked through our front door and realized the fine had seemingly been canceled. Sophie looked up from the couch with a weak smile, saying, "Please pretend this isn't a disaster." She told me in the lowest voice that Grandma had said there was no space at the table or anywhere else, despite the fact that she counted 28 chairs in use. A math problem with a single variable. Her. I listened. I let her explanation bounce about the room like a dropped luggage. Then I placed my arms around her and let silence do the talking. She fell asleep still wearing the sweater she'd chosen to wow them. When the house had settled, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the area where her Christmas supper should have been. I repeated every mortgage payment, every energy bill, every Kuwaiti dinar that had gone permanent. They had not ran out of room, they had ran out of gratitude. And they had exploited my daughter to issue the memo. That was when the switch flipped. No more explanations. No more polite negotiations. I didn't even consider if I'd act. Just how soon. We didn't say anything during the way over. My husband sat alongside me in silence, his hand lightly resting on my knee, like a grounding wire. Not quite comfortable, but sturdy. Present. That was sufficient. The morning after Christmas is always strange, foggy, as if the world is still hung over from candy and wrapping paper. I was hoped that the house would be unoccupied. It was not. There were still 2 extra vehicles in the driveway. I recognized one as Rachel's. The other possibly belongs to the relative who lingered late for leftovers. We got out. I grasped the envelope tightly. I had not slept. The shift, the situation with Sophie, the cold dinner tray on the counter that hadn't been cleaned up, it was all buzzing in the back of my mind like a blown fuse. I rang the doorbell. Waited. No one arrived. I rang again. Knocked. Nothing. "Let's just leave it," my spouse said gently. I stood for a second longer and then nodded. We walked back to the car. I gently nestled the mail behind the doorframe so it wouldn't blow away. I was opening the driver's side door when I heard it. A creak in the screen, a slippered footstep. I turned. My mother strolled out, wrapped in one of those fuzzy robes she always wore around the holidays, the ones she used to brag about obtaining at 90% off. She bent down, picked up the letter, opened it, and began reading. Her expression turned blank, then pale. Then she shouted, "David!" Her voice crackled like a broken wire. "David, get away of here, she is throwing us out." My father appeared at the door dressed in the clothing he wore yesterday. "What the hell?" Rachel followed, still dressed in her Christmas jammies and cradling a mug, as if she expected a nice morning. "What is going on?" My mother turned and pointed down the driveway as if I were a stray animal who had just urinated on her porch. "You ungrateful little—" We hopped in the car and drove away before I could hear the entire sentence. It didn't matter. I know the best hits. My phone was already vibrating when we arrived home. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. The 6th time, I picked up. "How dare you!" my mother shrieked. There was no hello, no pause, and no attempt to show sympathy for Sophie. "You've lost your damn mind." I held the phone away from my ear. I could still hear my father yelling in the background. "If you do this, you're no daughter of ours," he yelled. They did not ask why. They made no inquiry into what had occurred. They did not even mention Sophie, not once. I hung up. They kept phoning. Rachel began texting. I believe one message literally stated, "This will ruin your reputation. Think about your career." Oh honey. My patients do not care where my parents live. By the evening, my phone appeared to have gone through a breakup. 32 missed calls, 14 messages, and 3 voicemails. One cousin even had the courage to message, "This is not my place, but it feels extreme. You only have one mom." I did not respond to any of them. The next morning there was a knock on the door. I peeked through the peephole. Of course, it's my mother. She was standing on my porch in the same fuzzy robe, carrying the eviction letter, which was wrinkled and moist from being squeezed for 2 hours. I opened the door but did not welcome her inside. She did not wait. "Are you really doing this?" she hissed. "After what we've done for you?" I let that sit for a moment. Then I gently asked, "You mean the house I bought for you? Which bills did I pay? I arranged for health insurance because your Medicare did not cover your blood pressure medications." She flinched for milliseconds. Then she straightened, her gaze sharp. "We reared you. We gave you everything." "You didn't even let my daughter eat dinner," I replied. That temporarily stopped her. But she recovered quickly. "Do not be theatrical. We did not have enough chairs." "There were 28 people there," I explained. "Even a neighbor." Her lips were squeezed tight. "I didn't send that letter to be cruel," I clarified. "But if you think you can treat Sophie like she's disposable—" "Oh, for God's sake," she exclaimed, suddenly enthusiastic again. "Stop acting as if we are monsters. You are the one pulling your family apart due to a misunderstanding. And now you're threatening your parents." She held up the letter as if it were evidence in a trial. Then, and I swear, this seemed like theatrical, she ripped it in half. Just stood there and tore it down the middle, as if it would nullify the judicial process. "There," she said. "That's finished. Now, if you want us to forgive you, pay for Maya's science camp and stop throwing this foolish tantrum." She smiled, as if she had just fixed everything. I didn't say anything because I sensed they weren't taking me seriously. Not for 1 second. Not when I was a child. Not when I became a physician. Not even now. To them, I was still the awkward, science-obsessed girl who should be grateful for scraps and keep her place. The girl they despised but never truly admired. They assumed I wouldn't follow through. But they were mistaken. So I let my mother stroll off the porch, muttering to herself like the hero of a sad play. And I closed the door quietly and calmly. But in my mind, I was already planning the next step. My mother ripped up the eviction letter in front of me, as if it were a gutter cleaning flyer, after accusing me of being selfish, loveless, and emotionally unstable. Then she mustered the courage to grin and said, "Pay for Maya's science camp and we'll forgive you." She answered, "We will forgive you." As if they were the victims. Turning away my kid for Christmas was a failure in decorum rather than cruelty. 2 mornings later, I met with an attorney. I listed everything. The house in my name, the mortgage I had been paying for 7 years, the bills, the dental plan, and the quiet sacrifices. He did not flinch. "I assume you want a formal eviction," he replied, as if it were the weather. I nodded. The warning was sent out that same week, 60 days, paper stamped, signature obtained. And this time, they couldn't just take it up and pretend it didn't exist. I maintained paying the mortgage. I wasn't going to let my credit suffer for the sake of a statement, but everything else? Gone. Utilities. Cable. Medical reimbursement. They received a crash tutorial in what no support looks like. 2 weeks later, somebody knocked on my door. It was Aunt Laura. I thought she was a good aunt. She brought a tin of cookies and a practiced expression of worry. "Katie," she answered. "I just want to talk." I allowed her inside. I already understood why she was there. We sat in the kitchen. I poured tea. Neither of us touched it. "It just doesn't sound like you," she explained. "Throwing out your parents over a misunderstanding," she continued gently. I laughed once, not gently. I informed her about the house, the expenses, and the Christmas Eve treachery. How my parents had accommodated 28 individuals, including a neighbor and 2 cousins I hadn't spoken with in a decade, but not their own granddaughter. Aunt Laura paled. "I didn't know," she replied. "They didn't tell you," I explained. She walked away as if she couldn't stop thinking about what she had heard. 3 days later, I received an SMS that I had not previously understood. I do now. 1 week before the deadline, my lawyer called. "They haven't moved at all," he explained. "Then we proceed," I said. I listed the house the same day. Set a reasonable price, not too expensive. I wasn't aiming to maximize value. I simply wanted it to be over. A buyer made a bid quickly. Families enjoy that area. They simply wanted it empty. "Vacant possession is required," my representative reminded me. "Noted," I said. I did not go the day they were removed. The new owners handled the situation legally. I heard it was not pretty, but what happened next was not better. Rachel took them in. Of course she did. My sister used to cosplay as the better daughter. She conducted interviews with cousins as if it were a publicity tour. "She's abandoning them," she remarked. "All because of one holiday mishap." 3 weeks later, she showed up at my door, her eyes bloodshot and her hair in a frizzy bun. "I can't do it," she said, not even saying hi. "They are continuously fighting. Mom believes the living room is too small. Dad claims that my children are noisy. They refuse to share the bathroom. I am going insane." I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "They need a rental," she explained. "You could at least assist with that. Just enough for a deposit." "No, Emma. On Christmas Eve you stood there and watched as she was sent away. That was your decision. This is mine." She blinked, then turned to walk away. A week later, she also kicked them out. They ended up in a rental that no one would recommend. 2 rooms, 1 heating, and a front step that tilted like a shrug. Their pension barely covered the rent and groceries. Gone were the trips, dinner parties, and cruise they had planned for their anniversary. They tried to elicit sympathy from the extended family. I said I had cut them off without warning, that I was unstable, that I had always been cold. But by then, I had quietly chatted with the uncles and cousins. I sent them documents of the invoices I had paid. I forwarded the eviction letter, which was time-stamped and certified. One cousin simply said, "Wow." Another person sent a thumbs-up emoji. The family didn't rush to save them, and neither was I. 2 months later, Sophie and I were sitting on the porch, sipping iced tea. No plans, no performance, just a relaxing afternoon. She remarked, "I don't miss them, you know." I didn't either. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. I opened it reflexively. "I hope you are proud of what you have accomplished." I removed it. No pause. There's no breath. "They'll probably text again," Sophie replied casually. "They always do," I explained. "But they're not my problem anymore." And they were not. They told Sophie there was no room at the table. There's no more room in our lives for cruelty, control, or manipulation. Fast forward 2 years. They're still in that dilapidated rental. Still blaming everyone except themselves. Sophie is prospering now. She's studying what she enjoys. And the proceeds from the sale of the house paid for more than simply tuition. They also provided her with peace of mind. Me? A small amount of closure. I do not answer their calls. I do not send money. I don't lose sleep. I protected my daughter. I chose her. Finally. But tell me, have I gone too far? Or just far enough? My sister sabotaged my life from the inside and broke into my apartment. So I turned the footage over to the police and gave her name to the FBI. My oldest sister Kendra believed she was the most honest person to ever walk the globe. At the dinner table she would begin discussing who had gained and lost weight, as well as her impressions of everyone else's overall appearance. None of us would even participate, and if we criticized, she'd say she was just being honest. Another time, she said my skin looked awful, like a cockroach being chewed apart by a human. I rolled my eyes. It wasn't anything new, and the family had become accustomed to her BS. To be honest, I was pleased to cease asking her to future family occasions, but my aunt insisted on inviting her, promising that one day she'd grow out of it. Boy, was she mistaken. For our baby cousin's birthday one year, she emailed the family group chat and asked if she could introduce us to her boyfriend Miles for the first time. I expected him to be just as bad as Kendra. I was about to flatly refuse her plea, but everyone responded before I could, and because my family is so kind, they of course said yes. SMH. He appeared pleasant at first, the type of guy who greets the pet dog before greeting anybody else and holds open every door for you. But I never stopped being skeptical. The birthday kid, Leo, looked gorgeous. He was wearing a small blue onesie with balloon patterns all over it, and he did not cry once. He only wanted to embrace and play peekaboo. My uncles, my boisterous aunts, my divorced parents, and everyone else came out to support Leo. It was held at one of those kids' party places with everything: arcade, bowling, laser tag, ball pit, and so on. However, Kendra had managed to sneak in alcohol. We were all sitting there, eating pizza that tasted like plastic, when I saw she was drunk. Actually, all the adults noticed because you could smell it on her breath, and she spoke as if she knew everything about how the world operated. Miles sat next to her in the tiny orange chair as she exclaimed about how honest she is, and described why our cousin was wasting her time at community college. This is the literal definition of bragging about oneself. I virtually leaped for excitement when the birthday cake arrived, thinking it meant Kendra had finally shut up, lol. Everyone gathered around to sing happy birthday, as 5-year-old Leo clapped his small hands. My aunt pulled out this gorgeous dinosaur cake she had gotten up at the grocery store. As soon as we finished singing, Kendra jumped up to make a toast, sort of. Oh my gosh, you can't even make him a homemade cake? Do you even love him? Her voice was slurred, and she pointed with her red Solo cup. Furthermore, these decorations appear to have been sourced from a dollar store clearance bin. If you're going to have children, at least make an attempt. The other parents froze, and some children stopped eating their pizza mid-bite. My aunt's face turned red. Kendra kept going. I mean, I'm just being honest here. Pinterest exists for a reason, this is just sad. She was abruptly distracted by the sound of Leo crying. It was the heartbreaking wail that children let out when their world falls apart. Auntie Kendra says Mommy's cake is bad. And he wept. Mommy, why didn't you try? Miles sprang up so quickly that his chair tipped over. Kendra, pass me my stuff. We're done here. She laughed while still swaying. What? No way, I haven't even had cake yet. There's no we anymore, he said, turning to face her straight. I just watched you destroy a 5-year-old's birthday party. What kind of person does that? My uncle whispered, wow, from across the room. My cousin took out her phone. Kendra's jaw dropped. Babe, come on, I was just trying to help. Kids need to learn about standards. Standards? Miles's voice broke. He's 5. He thinks his mom hung the moon, and you just told him she doesn't love him enough. The entire room watched as if it were a movie. My aunt was still trying to console Leo, whose dinosaur shirt was saturated in tears. You're seriously breaking up with me here? Over this? Kendra's voice rose higher. Miles approached my aunt and offered her a $500 cash for the celebration. I'm sorry we ruined it. He then turned back to Kendra. Find your own ride home, and delete my number. He went toward the exit. Kendra stood paralyzed for around 3 seconds before reality struck. She grabbed her purse and dashed after him, heels clicking against the arcade floor, muttering something about overreacting. Dad said, good for him. Leo eventually stopped crying long enough to inquire. Is the mean lady gone? She was. We never saw her again, until a week later that is, because that's when my aunt heard a knock on the door. It was not Kendra. It was CPS. Someone filed an anonymous report regarding alcohol being supplied to minors at a child's birthday party and inattentive parenting. The CPS lady arrived at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. My aunt called me crying, barely able to speak. She elaborated. This woman in a gray suit was asking all these questions about the party. Did she serve alcohol to children? Were there proper safety measures in place? Was the venue appropriately supervised? The investigator carried a clipboard and took notes in clean handwriting. My aunt continued saying that it was Kendra who brought the alcohol. Nobody realized she had it until she was completely hammered. She gave the investigator the party location receipt, which proved it was an alcohol-free setting. But the investigator simply kept jotting down information, her attitude neutral and professional. She requested the names of all attendees, as well as phone numbers and, if feasible, email addresses. My aunt had to give them, opening up the party invitation list on her phone with trembling fingers. The lady stated that she will be contacting people to verify the story. I received my call 2 days later while I was at work. The investigator requested me to explain what happened at the party. I told her everything. How Kendra sneaked the wine into her purse, how she made Leo cry on his birthday, and how Miles abandoned her right in front of everyone. The investigator inquired as to whether my aunt was providing adequate supervision. I corrected myself. Of course she was. She was constantly checking on all the kids, making sure everyone was safe and having fun. She inquired whether there were any other troubling habits. I said, no, my aunt was a wonderful mother. She thanked me and hung up. However, that was not the end of it. Not even close. My aunt had to make 3 more home visits. They investigated her refrigerator to see if she had kept booze where Leo could get to it. They checked Leo's room for safety risks. They interviewed him without her presence, which scared her. He kept questioning whether he was in trouble for crying at his celebration. It crushed my aunt's heart. She told me he began having dreams about the unpleasant lady returning. She had to attend parenting classes every Saturday for 6 weeks, driving 45 minutes each way. Missing them meant risking losing Leo. She had to pay for them herself, $50 per class plus gas money, all because of that anonymous tip, We knew it was Kendra. Who else would know such specifics about the party? Who else would be so petty and vindictive? But we couldn't prove it. The investigator refused to reveal who created the report, citing privacy rules or whatever. My relative initiated a group text without Kendra to keep everyone informed. We provided screenshots of the bizarre texts Kendra was sending to various family members, alternating between acting victim and making threats. Miles then contacted me on Facebook. He sent me a long mail apologizing for everything. He felt responsible for introducing Kendra into our lives. He said she had been texting him non-stop from various numbers. First, she begged him to accept her back, sending long paragraphs about how she would change. Then she began claiming she was pregnant. He knew she was lying since they were usually cautious. Plus, the time frame didn't match. She claimed to be 3 months along when they'd only been dating for 2. But she continued to send him ultrasound photographs she discovered online. He did a reverse search and found it on a pregnant blog from 2015. He blocked each new number, but she kept creating more. She even made bogus social media personas to message him. He was considering replacing his phone completely and even obtaining a restraining order. I thanked him for his apology and assured him it was not his fault. He appeared like a kind guy who got mixed up with the wrong person. We all make blunders like this. He asked whether he might assist with the CPS investigation, perhaps by writing a statement regarding what had occurred. I promised to let him know if we needed anything. That's when things became pretty strange. My cousin Sophie began receiving strange messages on Instagram from her own account. But she was not sending them. Someone had made a phony profile with her photos and was messaging all of her friends, stating negative things about other family members. The phony Sophie was telling people that our grandmother was senile and shouldn't be trusted with money, that my uncle Gary was cheating on his wife, and that my other cousin was failing out of college due to substance abuse. Sophie spent hours attempting to get Instagram to remove the bogus account. She reported it about 20 times. Nothing occurred. Meanwhile, her true friends were perplexed, and several stopped talking to her, believing she had gone insane. She had to message everyone individually and explain that it wasn't her. Some immediately trusted her, but others remained doubtful, particularly those who had previously been harmed by the vicious messages. Then my Uncle Richard discovered a bogus Facebook profile using his name. This one was shared in local community groups, sparking debates about politics and religion, and making racist remarks on news items. His real co-workers noticed it, and HR summoned him for a meeting. He had to establish that he wasn't the one posting that rubbish. The discussion lasted 2 hours, and Richard had to display his real Facebook login history and explain why someone would mimic him online. We realized quite immediately that this was Kendra's doing. The bogus profiles all featured images from family occasions she had attended. Some of the images were unique to her, such as those she snapped with her phone. The angles were specific, the moments were candid, and the images were unquestionably not for public consumption. But again, we were unable to show anything. The accounts were created using random email addresses. Facebook and Instagram did not take our reports seriously. The worst one was when she created a false profile for my mother. She used it to remark on all of my mother's actual friends' posts, claiming their children were unattractive or their cooking was horrible. My mother lost 3 friendships over it before she even realized what was going on. One lady blocked her everywhere and refused to listen when Mom attempted to explain in the grocery store. Mom returned home from her shopping trip in tears. Her ice cream had melted after she remained in the parking lot crying for 20 minutes. My father started chronicling everything. He created a spreadsheet containing dates, times, and screenshots. He purchased a printer particularly for this purpose, claiming we required actual copies of everything. He stated we might need it later for legal issues, but lawyers are costly, and no one wanted to spend hundreds of dollars on this family drama. Kendra showed up to Leo's daycare. My aunt received the call when she was at work. The daycare director said that a woman claiming to be Leo's aunt attempted to take him up. She knew his whole name, date of birth, dinosaur backpack, and peanut allergy. But the staff recognized her from the description my aunt provided following the birthday party incident. They kept Leo inside and informed Kendra that she wasn't on the pickup list. Kendra supposedly caused a large disturbance by ranting about family rights and how dare they separate her from her nephew. She said that my aunt was an unfit mother, and she was only trying to help. She claimed to have documents showing her authorization, brandishing papers that turned out to be printouts of family photographs. The childcare phoned the police, but Kendra fled before they arrived. She drove out of the parking lot so quickly that she knocked over their sandwich board sign and left tire prints on the asphalt. My aunt had to leave work immediately to pick up Leo. Her supervisor was tolerant, but you could see he was tired of the drama. She had already missed days for CPS visits and parenting seminars. Now this. She began looking over her shoulder everywhere, terrified that Kendra would attempt again. She even began taking new routes to daycare, never going the same way twice. That weekend, we held a family meeting at my parents' place. Everyone came, except Kendra. We sat in the living room, eating chips and trying to figure out what to do. My uncle suggested we all block her on everything. My cousin suggested we fight back by creating phony profiles of her. My father told us to be calm and film everything. The talk went on in circles for hours, with everyone becoming increasingly irritated as the evening progressed. My aunt seemed weary. She had black circles under her eyes and was constantly checking her phone, as if Kendra would appear. She said that her job promotion was now in threat. Her boss had received anonymous emails claiming she was an alcoholic who endangered children. The emails featured warped accounts of what happened at the birthday party, implying that my aunt provided the wine and encouraged underage drinking. She had to attend another meeting with HR, present them the CPS report that cleared her, and explain the entire family scenario. They believed her, but stated they needed to look into any complaints. The promotion was put on hold indefinitely. She'd been there for 8 years, with a spotless record, and now this. When she told us how unjust everything was, her voice cracked. Miles texted me again that night. He had screenshots of Kendra's most recent communications. She stopped claiming pregnancy. Now she said he owed her money. She appeared to have made an investment in their future by purchasing clothes for their fictional child. She demanded $3,000 or threatened to sue him in small claims court. She had even made a list of items she had never purchased, such as cribs, strollers, and baby outfits. He joked about it, but I could tell he was stressed. He was a teacher and didn't have that much money laying around. He also showed me some interesting screenshots from when they were dating, in which Kendra discussed exacting revenge on those who had harmed her. Stories about co-workers who were dismissed after she filed anonymous complaints, and friends who ended relationships after she circulated rumors. She was proud of it, referring to it as karma with a little help. One communication in particular jumped out, in which she brags about evicting a roommate by filing noise complaints with the landlord, all because the roommate had eaten her yogurt once. I showed the screenshots to my father. He added them to his documentation folder, which was becoming quite thick. He'd started using dividers and color-coded tabs to categorize things by date and incident. He stated we might be able to demonstrate a pattern of behavior if we needed to pursue legal action. But none of us wanted to go that way. It seemed too extreme for family drama. Then my tires were cut. On Monday morning, I came out of my apartment to find all 4 tires flat. Not just flat, actually sliced. The sides contained these neat cuts. My neighbor stated he seen a woman in a hoodie lingering around my car the night before but didn't think much of it. He stated she'd been there for about 10 minutes, strolling around the automobile as if she was inspecting it. That night the parking lot security camera fortunately failed to function. I had to call off work and pay for a tow truck. 4 new tires cost about $600. The tire guy stated that whomever did it knew what they were doing. The cuts were precisely placed to render the tires irreparably damaged. He stated he has seen it before in domestic disputes, which made me feel even worse about the situation. I made a police report, but without evidence, they couldn't do anything. The cop appeared bored, as if this was just another family disagreement that he didn't want to deal with. He assigned me a case number and instructed me to contact if anything else happened. He didn't even dust for fingerprints, as they do on TV. Something else happened during the same week. My cousin Eli received a call from his landlord. Someone had reported him for having too many people living in his apartment, claiming he was breaking his contract by subletting. Eli lived alone with his cat. The landlord needed to come inspect, so Eli had to take time off work. The entire process took 3 hours, with the landlord examining cupboards and seeking for signs of additional tenants. Another anonymous complaint, which we all knew was not truly anonymous. Fake social media profiles kept growing. New ones appeared faster than we could report them. They started messaging extended family members who were unaware of the Kendra situation. My great-aunt in Florida called to inquire why she had messaged my mother asking for money. The bogus account included recent images and even highlighted particular facts about great-aunt's new condo that only family members would know. We had to explain everything to family who rarely use the internet. Grandma's 80th birthday was approaching in 3 weeks. We'd been organizing it for months, renting a church hall, hiring a DJ, ordering catering for 75 guests, and inviting family from 3 states. It was meant to be a massive celebration of her life. We even created a video montage of family images paired to her favorite songs. Then the flowers came at Grandma's place. 24 red flowers with a message saying, "Can't wait to celebrate with you, love Kendra." Grandma contacted my mother in tears. She did not want controversy at her party, she simply wanted to see her family and enjoy cake in peace. But now she was afraid Kendra would turn up and spoil everything, just as she did at Leo's party. The roses sat on her kitchen table like a threat, lovely yet ominous. We tried to soothe Grandma down by telling her we'd manage it. But how do you prevent someone from showing up at a public event? We couldn't employ security for a grandmother's birthday party. It would be ridiculous. My uncle proposed having someone watch the door, but that felt strange too. We were torn between wanting to protect Grandma's special day and not turning it into some sort of fortress. I began to notice stuff going missing from my flat. Nothing huge at first. A phone charger here, a coffee mug there. Things I assumed I'd misplaced. But then my laptop charger, favorite sweater, and half of my utensils went. It was strange and frightening. I would seek for something and knew it was supposed to be there, but it wasn't. When I relayed it to my mother, she stated the same thing was happening at their residence. Dad's reading glasses went missing, as did Mom's phone case and other miscellaneous items that made no sense to steal. We began to worry whether we were all going insane, misplacing stuff due to stress. However, the pattern seemed too regular across multiple houses to be coincidental. Then my cousin discovered her spare key missing from behind her doormat. She always kept it handy in case of an emergency. She searched everywhere, but it was simply gone. She promptly replaced her locks, spending money she did not have. According to the locksmith, it appeared that the key had been used routinely. The lock revealed symptoms of excessive wear. He suggested she update to a deadbolt, which would cost extra. That's when I decided to install a camera in my apartment. Nothing fancy, just a cheap one I purchased online and connected to my phone. I carefully positioned it to protect my front door and kitchen area with no blind spots. I figured I'd catch myself sleepwalking or something to prove I was being paranoid. I was not being paranoid. 3 days after I set up the camera, I received a motion alert while at work. I opened the app and expected to see my cat. Instead, I spotted Kendra. She was in my apartment, rifling through the kitchen drawers as if she owned the place. She took a few forks and proceeded to my living room. I was stunned as she picked up a photo of our family and threw it into her luggage. She even took a Coke from my refrigerator before departing. I contacted the cops immediately and dashed home. By the time I arrived, she had left. But I had video of Kendra breaking into my flat, clear as day. The cop who arrived this time took the situation more seriously. He said this constituted criminal trespass and theft. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes, right away. But here's the problem. When they went to question Kendra, she had an alibi. She claimed she was at a job interview at the exact time of the break-in. I have documents to prove it. The officer stated that while the video was helpful, it would be difficult to prosecute without other proof. Maybe the person in the video simply looked like her. He pointed out that the quality was not ideal. Even though I could see it was her. I recognized her from the way she walked, the purse she carried, and the systematic manner in which she searched through my belongings. But it appears that wasn't enough. The case went nowhere. The police suggested that I alter my locks and perhaps buy better cameras. Thank you for your valuable suggestions, buddy. We held another family meeting, this time at my aunt's house. She had set 3 deadbolts on her door following the daycare incident. The house felt like a fortress. We exchanged notes on everything that had happened. Fake accounts, missing stuff, and complaints to employers. Dad brought his documentation folder, which was now a full binder with a backup kept in a safe deposit box. That's when we recognized the pattern. Kendra knew precisely when we wouldn't be home. She showed up at my apartment while I was at work, went to my parents' house for their weekly grocery trip, then visited my cousin during her yoga session. She was following us somehow. The precision was unsettling. She never got it wrong about when we'd be out. My technologically competent relative worked it out. We have all shared Google Calendars from when we were organizing family gatherings. Kendra still had access. She could see every appointment, every job schedule, and every out-of-town trip. We had been unknowingly publicizing our schedules to her for months. The calendar even included locations for some activities, making it easier for her to find us. We immediately disabled her access and reset our passwords. But the harm had been done. She'd been following our habits like a stalker. It made my skin crawl just thinking about it. How long had she been observing and planning? We began going through our phones, deleting her from everything we could think of. Miles responded again with further screenshots. Kendra had escalated her request for $3,000 to threatening to sue him for emotional distress. She said that their split caused her to lose her job and become anxious. She sought $50,000 in damages. The texts were becoming longer and more bizarre, with strange capitalization and many exclamation points. Miles chuckled about it, but he did start looking for a lawyer just in case. He was a teacher, not a wealthy individual. This was quite stressful for him. He also said something unpleasant. Kendra had been telling everyone they were still dating. She arrived at his school during lunchtime, told the front desk she was his girlfriend, and brought him food. Security had to escort her out. She had made social media posts about their connection, identifying him in images from months ago as if they were new. Some of his co-workers had begun to question if he was okay after observing the commotion surrounding him. Things became worse in the week leading up to Grandma's party. My aunt's daycare stated they had been receiving hang-up calls all week. Someone repeatedly called and breathed into the phone before hanging up. They had improved their security systems and displayed Kendra's photo at the front desk, but it was impacting their business. Some parents were concerned about safety. One family had already moved daycares, citing security concerns. My mother's employer received a package addressed to her. Inside, there were printed screenshots of false social media posts that made it appear as if my mother had written nasty things about her co-workers. An anonymous note stated that they believed her manager should be aware of her true personality. Mom needed to attend another appointment with HR to explain. They believed her, but she was stressed out. She began having difficulties sleeping, frequently waking up at 3 a.m., with anxiety. Then came the letters to extended relatives, which were tangible letters mailed with stamps. They included images from family events with harsh remarks, pictures of relatives with circles around their faces and comments on their weight, clothing and lifestyle choices, all written to appear as if different family members were talking about each other. The handwriting was disguised, but similar enough to raise suspicions. My uncle in California called, upset, since he had received a letter from my father calling his wife a gold digger. My cousin in Texas received one from my aunt stating that her children were brats. The letters were intended to incite everyone to fight with one another, and they were effective. People were hurt and puzzled. Some relatives thought the letters were legitimate. Old familial conflicts were masterfully utilized. We spent hours on the phone doing damage control, explaining the scenario to distant family who had no idea why Kendra would do this. Some people believed us. Others assumed we were hiding up family drama. My mother cried after speaking with her sister, who accused her of always being critical. The bogus letter had tapped into their early insecurities. It took 3 more calls to persuade her sister that it was all Kendra's fault. I started cautiously checking my mail every day. My neighbors undoubtedly thought I was nuts because I would peep out the window when the mail truck came. I installed a lock on my mailbox, something I had no idea you could do. The hardware shop employee stated that many people have been doing it recently in order to avoid identity theft. He showed me 3 different types, and I chose the most secure. The documentation binder expanded into 2 binders, then 3. Dad spent the evenings sorting everything chronologically. He constructed an index and organized episodes by category. He stated that if we ever needed to demonstrate a pattern of harassment, we would be prepared. But, honestly, it seemed hopeless. What could we actually do? She wasn't physically threatening us. She was just steadily damaging our life with one anonymous complaint at a time. When HR summoned me in for a meeting, my employment position became more problematic. They had gotten an email about me allegedly harassing a coworker. The email featured screenshots of inappropriate text messages I'd never sent to a colleague. They were plainly fake. The phone number wasn't even mine. But I had to sit there and defend myself, explain the family situation, and show them proof that the number wasn't mine. The meeting lasted 1 hour and seemed like an interrogation. My supervisor trusted me, but he stated they needed to examine any complaints. I noticed him looking at me differently thereafter, like if I were a drama he didn't want to deal with. I'd been there for 5 years with no problems, and now I was the employee with the crazy family submitting phony complaints. I began upgrading my resume just in case. My productivity suffered because I was continually concerned about what would happen next. 3 days before Grandma's party, we held an emergency family meeting. Everybody was on edge. Half of the household was squabbling over the letters. My aunt was fatigued from the CPS situation, which is still ongoing. My mother was concerned about job. I was paranoid about everything. We needed a plan for the party. The tension in the room was strong enough to cut with a knife. After all, my uncle advised hiring security, even if it was just one guy to watch the door. But Grandma instantly shut it down. She did not want her birthday to feel like a military mission. She just wanted a regular party with her family. But we all knew if Kendra showed up, things would be anything but regular. When Grandma mentioned it, her voice shook, and everyone became even more desperate to safeguard her day. We agreed on a compromise. We'd have 2 cousins alternate turns by the door, just hanging out. If Kendra showed up, they'd text the group chat and we'd handle things quietly. We would not make a scene until she did first. It wasn't the ideal strategy, but it was something. We even practiced how we would escort her out if needed. Miles offered to help. He said he'd park outside and wait for her automobile. If she showed up, he'd try to talk to her first, possibly persuading her to leave before she even entered. We appreciated the offer, but informed him he didn't have to participate. He insisted, claiming that he felt responsible for introducing her to our family. The remorse in his words was clear. The night before the party, I couldn't fall asleep. I kept looking at my camera app, expecting to see Kendra in my apartment again. I changed the locks, but still felt uncomfortable. Each noise made me jump. My cat undoubtedly thought I had lost my mind since I kept getting up to check the door. I ultimately gave up sleeping around 4 a.m. I just sat on my couch, watching Netflix. I was not the only one. The family group chat remained active all night, with people voicing their anxiety. My relative couldn't sleep because she was concerned about the false social media accounts. My aunt was anxious about Leo, who had asked if the cruel lady would attend Grandma's party. My mother had stress-baked 3 dozen cookies at 2 a.m. We were all a mess. I awoke on the morning of the party to texts from Miles. He'd been getting calls all night from different numbers, with Kendra crying, begging, threatening, then crying again. He has blocked 15 new numbers since midnight. He was still going to come and watch for her. He claimed he had purchased a new shirt for the occasion, wanting to appear well for Grandma, even if he was only waiting in his car. He appeared resolved to set things right somehow. We arrived at the church hall early to set everything. The decor were perfect. Gold and white balloons, photos of Grandma over the years, and fresh flowers on each table. The catering smelt fantastic. The DJ was putting together music from Grandma's era. Everything was set for the perfect party. We had worked very hard to make this unique for her. Then we found the gift. It was sitting on the gift table, wrapped in silver paper and tied with a large red bow. The card read, "For Grandma, from your loving granddaughter Kendra." My stomach sank. She had already arrived, or someone had left it off for her. In any case, it felt like a bomb was resting among the typical presents. My father carefully lifted up and shook it. Nothing rattled. It wasn't heavy. It may have been clothing or something trivial. But we all knew Kendra wasn't doing anything innocent anymore. My uncle suggested we just throw it away. My aunt suggested we open it first to ensure it was not something that would upset Grandma. We stood there, fighting in whispers as the DJ tested his speakers. Finally, my cousin Tessa just grabbed it and ripped it open. Inside was a photo album. At first, the images of Grandma with all of us over the years appeared to be pleasant. Then we flipped through it. There was something wrong with every photograph. The faces were scratched out using red ink. Mean comments were left under each one. Grandma with her disappointing family appears in a Christmas shot. The people who never appreciated her was written under a birthday photo. It was psychotic stuff. We tossed it in the dumpster outside and promised not to tell Grandma. But suddenly everyone was on edge. If Kendra had previously been here, would she return? My cousins took up positions near the entryway early. Miles texted that he was in the parking lot, watching. We were as prepared as we could be. Guests began arriving at 2 p.m. Grandma looked stunning in her purple dress, which she had bought especially for today. She was overjoyed, hugging everyone and sobbing up over the decorations. For a time, it seemed like a regular family gathering. Children went around playing tag. Adults spoke over coffee. The DJ played all of Grandma's favorites. I began to relax a little. Then my cousin at the door messaged the group chat. "She's here." My heart began thumping. I looked toward the entryway and saw Kendra saunter in as if she owned the place. She was dressed up, carrying a present bag, and smiling at family who were unaware of all the trouble. Some of them smiled and hugged her, unaware of what she had been doing to us for months. Miles arrived out of nowhere and intercepted her near the dessert table. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see her face becoming angry. She tried to walk around him, but he kept getting in the way, not aggressive, yet persistent, like a basketball player on defense. More family began to notice something was amiss. My father and uncle moved in to help. They surrounded her casually, making the conversation appear regular. but Kendra's voice rose. I have every right to be here. She's my grandmother too. People were beginning to stare. Children stopped playing to watch. This was just what we didn't want. Grandma saw the ruckus from across the room. Her face sank when she noticed Kendra. Her expression was sapped of happiness. She began walking over, perhaps to keep the peace. My mother attempted to divert her with cake, but Grandma wouldn't have it. Kendra, Grandma remarked as she approached the gathering. I think you should leave. The room became quiet. Even the children felt something significant was happening. Kendra's cheeks turned red. Grandma, I just wanted to celebrate with you. I brought you a gift and everything. She held up the gift bag as proof that she belonged there. After everything you've done to this family? Please leave. Grandma's voice was forceful and sad. You could tell it was breaking her heart. She despised conflict, particularly within her own party. Kendra laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. Everything I've done? They're the ones who turned you against me. I'm just honest, and they can't handle it. She grew louder with each word. Some relatives began pulling children away from the situation. You called CPS on your own family, Grandma explained calmly. You've been harassing everyone for months. That's not honesty, that's cruelty. The mask eventually slipped. Kendra's face had twisted into something nasty. Fine. You want to know the truth? You've always loved them more than me. Every single family event, it's about everyone else. Poor little Leo and his stupid birthday, Tessa and her college graduation. But when I accomplished something? Nothing. She began pulling papers out of her purse and waving them around. I documented everything. Every time you forget my birthday. Every time you praise them instead of me. I have proof of favoritism. The papers flew everywhere. Some resembled written text messages. Others were photographs with bizarre annotations. Miles came forward and began gathering the papers. Kendra, stop, this isn't helping anything. She whirled on him, her eyes furious. You were supposed to be on my side, but no, you fell for their act too. Poor innocent family, being terrorized by mean Kendra. My aunt spoke up. You tried to kidnap my son from daycare, she said, her voice quivering with rage. You've been breaking into our homes. You got me investigated by CPS. You nearly cost me my job. That's not about favoritism. That's about you being dangerous. Kendra laughed again. Dangerous? I'm just showing you all what it feels like. To have your life disrupted. To have people judge you unfairly. To lose things that matter to you. She gazed around the room, noticing all the watching faces. Every single one of you has said things about me behind my back. I know because I've heard you. Well, now you know how it feels to have people talk about you. Someone mumbled, we need to call the police. But Grandma raised her hand. Kendra, I'm giving you one chance. Leave now, peacefully. Get help, real help, or we will involve the authorities. Her speech remained calm, but tears streamed down her cheeks. For a brief moment, I thought Kendra may actually leave. She looked around at all of us, perhaps realizing how far she had pushed things. Then her gaze fell on the birthday cake, which had 3 tiers and was covered with purple flowers, with the words, Happy 80th Birthday, written in gold frosting. Before anyone could stop her, she lunged at it. My cousin Eli was closest, and he grabbed her arm just as her hand touched the cake. They wrestled for a second, with Kendra yelling about injustice and lying. The cake wobbled perilously. Other relatives rushed in to aid. It took 4 people to move her away from the dessert table. She was still crying, with mascara dripping down her cheeks. Miles then brought out his phone. I'm calling 911. This has gone too far. Kendra heard him, and something inside her snapped utterly. She broke free from the family who were holding her and dashed for the exit, knocking down a floral arrangement on the way. We heard her automobile pull out of the parking lot, tires squealing. The room fell silent for almost 10 seconds. Then Grandma began crying. Not quiet tears like before, but true weeping. My mother and aunt surrounded her and guided her to a chair. The celebration was officially ruined. The kids were crying because Grandma was crying. Adults stood around, horrified. But then something incredible occurred. My uncle rose up and clinked his fork on the glass. Hey, everyone, I know that was intense, but we're here for Grandma's 80th birthday. Kendra doesn't get to ruin that. He stepped up to the DJ booth and muttered something. Music began playing. Can't Help Myself by the Four Tops, Grandma's favorite song. My father joined in. Come on, Ma. Dance with me. He extended his hand to Grandma. She shook her head at first, still crying, But he persevered and performed a silly dancing routine that made her grin through her tears. She finally took his hand and allowed him to take her to the dance floor. Others gradually joined in. The young kids began racing around again. Someone restored the flowers that had been knocked over. My aunt cut the cake that had survived the attack. Within 20 minutes, the party felt almost normal again. Almost. Miles found me by the punch bowl. "I'm really sorry about all this. I feel responsible." I told him not to apologize. No one blamed him. He explained that he had been recording Kendra's meltdown on his phone in case we needed it for legal purposes. Smart thinking. He also stated that he planned to file for a restraining order first thing Monday morning. The party concluded approximately 6 p.m. Grandma hugged everyone especially long and thanked them for staying, despite the drama. She seemed fine, but tired. The kind of tired that comes from mental exertion rather than physical effort. We packed up her gifts and the leftover cake. Nobody acknowledged the scene with Kendra, but it lingered in the air like smoke. My cousin discovered something strange while cleaning up. A little device wedged under one of the tables. It looked like a little recorder or GPS tracker. We had no idea how long it had been there, but it explained how Kendra always seemed to know where we were at events, even after we had disabled her calendar access. She had supplemented her computerized tracking with physical spy equipment. We gave it to Miles to use as proof for his restraining order. That night, the family group chat was once again active. However, this time it wasn't anxiety. People were sharing pleasant memories from the party, such as images of Grandma dancing and videos of the children playing. We were attempting to focus on the positive aspects. To make up for the drama, my mother suggested that we all send cards to Grandma and tell her how much she meant to us. Everyone agreed immediately. Monday morning brought news that Kendra had been arrested. Not for the party, but for something else. Remember the bogus social media accounts? It turned out she used one to threaten a local lawmaker who had blocked her on Twitter. The FBI takes that stuff seriously. They'd been investigating for weeks and had finally gathered enough evidence. The party meltdown was simply awful timing for her. Miles sent us the news piece. Kendra was facing federal accusations of cyber harassment and making threats. The research had revealed scores of fraudulent accounts, not just those targeting us. She'd been doing this to ex-coworkers, old classmates, and even random people who irritated her online. We were simply her main targets. The FBI discovered proof on her computer of this behavior over the course of several years. When CPS learned of my aunt's arrest, they closed her case immediately. The investigator apologized, stating they had to follow up on all reports but now realized it was malicious. Leo was finally able to quit worrying about the unpleasant lady. He asked if she was going to jail, and my aunt responded definitely, at least for a while. Over the next 2 weeks, things gradually returned to normal. My mother's workplace ceased receiving complaints. The bogus social media accounts fell dormant. We could check our letters without feeling anxious. I stopped obsessively monitoring my apartment. It was strange how peaceful things got after months of commotion. Miles began dating a coworker named Sophie. They met when he came to get me for lunch one day. She thought he was cute, so I figured, why not introduce them? They hit it off right away. When we initially learned Kendra had a boyfriend, we had no idea what we were in for. It turned out he was a lovely guy who had gotten mixed up with the wrong person. We learned more about Kendra's arrest from the prosecution. She was looking serious. The FBI discovered hundreds of victims across several states. She had been operating a harassment campaign for years before she targeted us. We were actually fortunate. Some people lost their jobs, relationships, and even custody of their children as a result of her phony claims. The prosecutor stated that our documentation will be useful in the case. Grandmother decided to write Kendra a letter. We attempted to persuade her out of it, but she was adamant. She stated that despite everything, Kendra was still family. The letter was brief, saying just that she loved her and hoped she would find treatment in prison. Perhaps this was her lowest point, and she could recover. Classic grandma, always seeing the good in people. Kendra never wrote back. We learned via her court-appointed lawyer that she was accepting a plea agreement of 5 to 7 years in federal prison. She would also have to make restitution to her victims. The lawyer asked whether we wanted to provide victim impact statements. Some of us did, and some did not. I composed one about my dread of not feeling safe in my own home. My aunt wrote on how it impacted Leo. The sentencing occurred on a Tuesday. Only Miles attended court. He remarked Kendra looked strange, like she was smaller. She did not make eye contact with him. When the judge read the penalty, she simply nodded. There is no dramatic outburst, no allegation of being misunderstood, only acceptance. Miles stated that it was genuinely sad to watch. We had another family gathering for Thanksgiving. No one addressed Kendra, but her absence was felt. Grandma had placed a place for her out of habit, but she gently removed it before dinner. Leo was back to his cheerful self, playing with his cousins and consuming an excessive amount of pie. Finally, my aunt had received her promotion. Mom's workplace drama was forgotten. Even the extended family members who had received the unpleasant messages were present, and all fences had been repaired. Miles and Sophie become an official couple. He fit right in, working in the cooking and playing board games with the kids. Someone joked that he was the best thing to emerge from the Kendra mess. He laughed and said he was just happy to be part of a normal family again. We all understood what he meant. I still keep the camera in my flat, but I rarely check it. To ensure safety, the locks were replaced twice. Sometimes I wonder how one individual wreaked such havoc, how we all spent months looking over our shoulders, distrustful of everything. But ultimately, I'm relieved it's over and that we survived as a family. We don't talk about Kendra much anymore. When her name comes up, there's an awkward silence before someone shifts the topic. Grandma still has images of herself in old albums, but nobody recommends removing them. She was a part of our history, even if it is one we would prefer to forget. However, the family has grown closer together. Nothing like common pain can bring people together. Leo celebrated his 7th birthday last week with the same party location and dinosaur theme because he is hooked. However, this time there was no drama, no uninvited guests. There were no tears, only joyous ones when he unwrapped his presents. This time, my aunt prepared the cake herself. It was a T-Rex with chocolate frosting. It was asymmetrical and the frosting was uneven, but Leo declared it perfect. And it was. That's about all there is to say. Kendra is serving her sentence. We have moved on with our lives. The restraining order is still in effect, but we don't need it from prison. Miles and Sophie are talking about moving in together. Grandma turned 81 and we are already planning her next party. Life is good. Boring even. And after everything we've been through, dull is precisely what we wanted. Sometimes I worry if Kendra thinks about us in prison, if she regrets everything or still believes she was justified. But then I understand it isn't important. She made her decisions and accepted the consequences. We shielded our family and emerged stronger. That is what matters. That, and ensuring sure Leo's birthday is never ruined by someone who pretends to be honest. According to the prosecutor's most recent update, Kendra was undergoing therapy in prison. Maybe she'll really change. Perhaps she'll emerge as a different person. Or perhaps not. Either way, she is no longer our problem. We have birthdays to celebrate and memories to create. Good ones this time. The kind in which everyone leaves happy and no one contacts CPS. My sister was the family's $2 million golden girl. They worshipped her fake struggles and ignored my scars, so I exposed her lie to the entire school. You see, my younger sister has Down syndrome with a high functioning level. She has a type of Down syndrome in which just some of your cells carry the extra chromosome. Thus, although looking slightly different, she had the same IQ as the average individual. But the rest of the world didn't know, and she did too. It took me some time to figure out what was going on because I loved her so much as a child. I didn't really consider her a friend. Instead, I saw her as someone I wanted to make happy, even if it meant making sacrifices. I always did her schoolwork when she requested and gave her anything she wanted. "We're so proud of you for being such an amazing big sister," my parents would say. This was the last time they ever praised me. Because one day, I told Linda that I was too sleepy to complete her assignment. But instead of saying she understood, or even ignoring me, she kicked the back of my legs until I collapsed and tried to breathe. I tried calling out my parents' names, and after a few minutes, my mother finally climbed the stairs. "Mom, Linda, excuse me," she said, standing there as if I had just done something wrong. "Your sister has Down syndrome. Of course she is going to make a few mistakes sometimes." She then stomped downstairs and gave Linda her favorite ice cream before returning to watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Heat rushed my face. I felt a feeling of remorse go over me. Was I truly a horrible sister? That night, my query was answered. I was sound asleep at 1 a.m. Linda stormed into my room. "You know, I calculated exactly how hard I needed to kick you to make you fall without leaving bruises. Physics is pretty useful." When I looked up, I saw an evil sneer on her face, and I realized she was simply playing along with the entire Down syndrome thing. From there, things only worsened. One summer afternoon, we were eating watermelon together, and I gave her the juiciest portions. I was accidentally chewing too loudly, so she struck me in the back of the head till I felt like I had a concussion. "Stop eating like an effing peasant," she exclaimed. When my parents rushed in, I expected them to help me stand, but instead they went over to console Linda. "I'm sorry your sister can't be better. That's why my first heartbreak didn't involve a boy. It was my parents. And because Linda and I attended the same school, I couldn't avoid it." She would tell everyone what a terrible person I was, and every morning was filled with dirty looks and whispered gossip directed at me. There was only one person who supported me. Jeff. Jeff had a sibling with full-fledged Down syndrome, so he understood what it was like to care for one, and he despised how Linda treated me even more than I did. He was the only one who opened his eyes enough to notice the bruises on my body and the scars on my skin that had appeared before I learned how to follow a fire drill. However, I did nothing the entire time. Because despite the fact that everyone we knew treated her better than they did me, she still looked like she had Down syndrome, and I noticed the strange looks she got on the street, as well as the comments ignorant lads made about how they'd have to bag her face. I reasoned if the situations were reversed, I'd probably hate myself too. But then she went too far. Jeff and I were sitting together in the lunch canteen when Linda came over and perched on his lap. It was basically their first time speaking. "Hey, will you go out with me?" she said, fluttering her eyelashes. Jeff yelled out, "I'm gay, girly pop," before moving his wrist in a sleigh motion. It made me shudder, but when I looked across at Linda, she appeared to be really upset. Later that day, when I arrived home, my mother greeted me at the door. "You're not to spend time with Jeff ever again." My face lost its color. She said more. "He should be locked up after what he did to your sister. I mean, intimately assaulting a girl with Down syndrome is just disgusting." I nodded and pretended to listen before dashing to my room. Everyone at our school was posting stories on Instagram about Jeff being a rapist. Tears rushed down my face. I hoped Linda wouldn't keep going, but I was mistaken. After 6 months, Linda was testifying in court. Nobody listened to me, and Jeff was sentenced to a year in prison with no possibility of parole. This time, I knew she would not get away with it. Because 12 months in federal imprisonment allows you to reflect on strategy rather than suffering. I paid close attention to everything Linda did. I observed her when she believed no one was present. Her conversation, her mannerisms, and her victim mindset, which led her to believe the world was out to get her. And by the time Jeff left, I had devised the ideal strategy to ruin her. The day Jeff was freed was unusual. I picked him up from the jail center, and he looked different, not physically, but rather exhausted. His eyes had a hollow aspect to them, as if he'd seen things that made him older than his years. We drove silently for a bit before he spoke. He told me that he spends every day thinking about how to get back at her. I mentioned that I had a plan, but he cut me off. He answered, "No, I have a better idea. Just trust me on this one." His voice was also different, tougher somehow. I was confused, but I consented. The following week at school was weird. Jeff avoided me entirely. He wouldn't look at me in the corridors. Then, on Friday, I witnessed something that made my stomach drop. Jeff was sitting with Linda for lunch. They were laughing together. My hands become shaky. Had they jailbroken him? Was he playing a long game? I tried to capture his attention, but he refused to look at me. After school, I waited near his locker. When he eventually arrived, Linda was with him. She smirked at me before grabbing his hand. Jeff glanced at me and said, "Sorry. I realized some things while I was away. I'm actually straight, and Linda is amazing." My jaw fell. Linda's grin became larger. They both went away, leaving me standing there like a fool. That night, I was unable to sleep. I kept repeating everything in my mind. Jeff had been my lone ally, and now he's dating the person who shattered his life. It did not make sense. Unless this was his plan. I grabbed my phone and texted him. He did not respond. The next day, Saturday, I noticed on Linda's Instagram that she was at Jeff's house, meeting his family, the same family whose second kid has Down syndrome. I knew Jeff's parents well. They were really brilliant folks. If Linda wanted to fit in with them, she'd have to reveal her true colors someday. I decided to wait and see. Monday arrived, and something was different. Linda was talking more in class, answering questions correctly and using big words. People started to notice. By Wednesday, she was assisting other students with their schoolwork, which she had previously assigned to me. Children began whispering. But this time it wasn't about me. They were confused about Linda. How can a person with Down syndrome suddenly explain calculus? Jeff's parents picked him up from school on Thursday. From across the parking lot, I observed Linda talk to them. She was making hand signals and speaking hurriedly, apparently hoping to impress them. Jeff's mother kept tilting her head, attentively examining Linda. His father was frowning. That night, Jeff finally texted me back. One word: patience. Linda's life began to unravel on Friday. In biology class, she corrected the teacher about something. Everyone, including the teacher, looked astonished. At lunch, I sat alone as usual, eating an apple. I made sure to chew loudly, very loudly. Linda was seated with Jeff and his pals nearby. I could see her becoming agitated. She kept looking over at me. I took another large bite. Crunch. Then another. Crunch. She stood up abruptly. Jeff grasped her arm, but she threw him off. She stormed up to my table. I kept eating while looking straight ahead. Crunch. That was when she lost it. She took the fruit from my fingers and tossed it across the cafeteria. It smacked the wall with a splat. The entire room became silent. Every single person stared at us. Linda's face was flushed with wrath. She shrieked, "You think you're so clever, don't you? Chewing like that on purpose." I remained calm and replied, "I don't know what you mean, Linda. I'm just eating lunch." She lunged at me, but Jeff moved quickly to stop her. He replied, "Babe, calm down. She's not worth it." But Linda was not listening. She was yelling about how I had ruined her life, how I was envious of her, and how I couldn't tolerate that she was unique. The longer she spoke, the more normal she sounded. No slurred speech, no misunderstanding, just pure, eloquent wrath. Teachers began rushing over. The principal appeared. Linda was still ranting, with words that would make a college professor proud. Someone started recording with their phone. Then another person. Soon, half of the cafe had their phones out. Jeff let go of Linda and took a step back, his expression one of shock and perplexity. He commented, "Linda, you sound different." She froze. The realization struck her like a truck. She had blown her disguise totally. The principal summoned Linda to come to his office. As they moved away, I could hear children already discussing. "Did you see that? She sounded totally normal. Has she been faking this whole time?" Jeff sat down beside me. He spoke softly. "That was even better than I planned. I just wanted to make her comfortable enough to slip up. I didn't think she'd explode like that." We watched as more videos appeared on social media. By the end of the day, Linda's meltdown had gone viral across our campus. The truth was finally revealed, captured in high resolution for all to see. The weekend was awful. My phone continued buzzing with notifications every few minutes, and the screen lit up my dark bedroom like a strobe light. People from school messaged me incessantly. They wanted to know if Linda had always been like this, if I knew she was lying, and if all of her stories about me were false. I did not respond to any of them. I was fatigued and drained from years of this nightmare. Monday morning arrived too quickly. I expected mayhem when I got into school, but it was far worse. It was divided. Half of the students thought Linda was a deceitful liar. The other half believed she was still a victim who had simply had a bad day. Jeff found me by my locker. He told me, "This isn't over yet. We need more proof." I inquired what he meant. He went on. "One video isn't enough. People are already making excuses for her, saying she was just stressed or having a moment. We need something bigger." I had no idea what bigger meant till lunchtime. Linda walked into the cafeteria. As if nothing had occurred. She was back to her old tricks. Slurred words, bewildered faces, the whole lot. People are paying closer attention today, however. I noticed students analyzing her moves, looking for flaws in her performance. Jeff and I sat together this time. We didn't say much, just watched. Linda sat with her normal group, but they were uncomfortable. She kept trying to engage them in conversation, but they only gave brief responses. Then Ryan approached her table. Ryan attended our AP physics class. He was holding a textbook. He asked Linda if she could help him with an issue, saying he had heard she was quite good in physics. The cafeteria became silent again. Linda's face became pallid. She muttered something about not doing well in school. Ryan persisted. He responded, "But you told someone you calculated exact force vectors. That's advanced stuff." Linda sprang up suddenly, knocking over her tray. Food got everywhere. She started crying and went away. But as she rushed, I heard her say something about kinetic energy under her breath. More people heard it too. The remainder of the week was tense. Linda doubled down on her act, but no one was buying it anymore. Teachers began to pay notice too. Mrs. Peterson from English requested Linda to read aloud in class. Linda appeared to struggle with basic words, but when no one was watching, I caught her rolling her eyes. Alan also witnessed it. He was sitting just behind her. After class, he told everyone what he had seen. The stories began stacking up. Kids remembered Linda making mistakes in the past, such as using loud words or solving issues too quickly. They simply hadn't paid attention before. Now they were connecting the dots. By Thursday, Linda was becoming desperate. She confronted Jeff in the corridor, asking him why he was ignoring her and not defending her anymore. Jeff played dumb. Said he didn't understand what she meant, but still cared for her. She grabbed his shirt and yelled, "Stop lying to me. I know what you're doing." Jeff gently removed her hands and said, "Babe, you're scaring me. You've been acting so differently lately." She stormed off. Things got out of hand on Friday. We had a school assembly discussing inclusiveness and disabilities. The principal believed it would assist to settle things down and increase people's understanding. It had the opposite effect. During the session, they discussed several forms of disability. When they stated high-functioning conditions, everyone turned to see Linda. She sat in the front row, attempting to appear puzzled, but her jaw was tight. Her hands were in fists. Following the assembly, Linda cornered me in the restroom. "You think you've won, don't you?" she asked. I cleansed my hands and replied, "I don't know what you mean." She laughed, but not in a pleased way. She went on. "Jeff told me everything, how you two planned this whole thing." I turned to face her. I responded, "Jeff and I haven't talked in weeks. You made sure of that, remember?" Her expression twisted. She responded, "Stop lying. He admitted it. You're both trying to ruin me." I shrugged and began to go. She had blocked the door. That's when Sarah entered. Sarah was Jeff's cousin. She had transferred to our school last month. She looked between us and asked whether everything was well. Linda instantly returned to her act, slurring her words and claiming she was just disoriented and needed assistance locating her class. Sarah lifted her eyebrow. She responded, "Really? Because it sounded like you were threatening her. And your speech was perfect 5 seconds ago." Linda's mask dropped barely for a second. Her face flashed with wrath. She was then pushed by Sarah and fled. Sarah glanced at me and said, "Jeff's parents want to meet with you. They have some questions about Linda." I agreed to attend after school. The meeting was tough. Jeff's parents, Ruth and Bobby, sat across from me in the living room. Jeff was also present, but he chose to remain silent. Ruth spoke first. She went on. "We've been watching Linda carefully. Something isn't right. My son Jeff's brother has Down syndrome, real Down syndrome. What Linda has, it's different." I nodded. Bobby leaned forwards. He proceeded. "We did some research. Mosaic Down syndrome, which is what Linda claims to have, can vary greatly. But her behavior patterns don't match any medical literature." I told them about the incident when we were kids. How she calculated how hard to kick me and acknowledged it. Ruth's face turned grim. She elaborated. "She's been manipulating everyone, including the legal system." Jeff eventually spoke up. He went on. "I wanted to expose her. Show everyone what she really is. But I needed her to trust me first to let her guard down. It worked better than I thought." His parents exchanged looks. Bobby responded, "We need to be careful. She's already proven she'll use the law as a weapon. We can't give her any ammunition." Ruth agreed. She went on. "But we also can't let her keep doing this. It's wrong." We spoke for another hour, trying to decide what to do. That weekend, Linda made a major mistake. She expressed on Instagram how difficult it was to live with her condition and how others could not comprehend her problems. But throughout the post, she employed immaculate grammar and complicated sentence patterns with no errors. Someone took a screenshot before she could delete and publish a dumbed-down version. The screenshot spread like wildfire. By Sunday night, everyone had witnessed it. Monday mornings were frantic. Linda attended school with our parents. They marched directly to the principal's office. I could hear my mother ranting down the hallway about cyberbullying and bigotry, but the principal wouldn't have it. More parents called over the weekend. They sought answers. They wanted to know if their children had been duped, if Linda had been lying the entire time. During lunch, an announcement was broadcast over the speakers. There will be a parent-teacher conference that evening. Every family was highly encouraged to attend. Jeff found me after class. He went on. This is it. Tonight everything comes out. Just stick to the truth. No embellishments. Let her hang herself with her own rope. I returned home to find my folks furious. My mother shouted at me for 2 hours, accusing me of destroying Linda's life and calling me envious and hateful. I did not argue. I just walked inside my room and waited. The conference started at 7 o'clock. We arrived to find the auditorium crowded with parents, instructors, and students. Everyone sought answers. The principal began by stating that they were there to discuss concerns regarding a student-related incident. He didn't name Linda, but everyone knew. He emphasized the value of honesty and trust among their educational community. Then he opened the floor to questions. The first parent to speak was Kelly Allen's mother. She stated that her kid had been telling her unsettling information about a pupil who may be claiming to have a disability. She wondered what the school was doing about it. Before the principal could respond, my mother stood up. She declared, "This is a witch hunt. My daughter has Down syndrome. She's being persecuted for being different." That's when Ruth, Jeff's mother, stepped up. Her response was, "With all due respect, I have a son with Down syndrome. I know what it looks like. What Linda has been displaying is not consistent with any form of the condition." The room erupted. Parents battling with each other, some protecting Linda and others seeking inquiries. The principal attempted to restore order. That's when Linda got up. She said, "Stop it, all of you. Just stop." The room became silent. She was breathing rapidly. She had a crimson face. She went on. "You want the truth? Fine. Yes, I have mosaic Down syndrome. Yes, I have above-average intelligence. But do you know what it's like to look different? To have everyone treat you like you're stupid before you even open your mouth?" The room remained quiet. She proceeded. She elaborated. "I learned early that if I played into it, people were nicer. They gave me things. They didn't expect much. It was easier than fighting every single day to be seen as normal. Some parents were sympathetic. Others appeared angry. My mother reached for Linda, but she drew away. She elaborated. And yes, I used it to my advantage sometimes. But my sister, she never understood. She had everything. Normal face, normal life. Everyone loved her. I just wanted some of that." Her voice broke, but it was too late. The damage was done. The principal cleared his throat. He went on. "Regardless of the reasons, there are serious allegations about false accusations made against another student. We need to address this." Jeff's father stood up. He elaborated. "My son spent a year in detention because of those false accusations. A year of his life gone based on lies." Linda's face turned white. She replied, I didn't mean." But Bobby was not done. He elaborated. "We have statements from multiple witnesses who heard Linda admit she lied. We have evidence she's been manipulating people for years. This needs to stop." The room exploded again. This time the principal needed to call in security to assist settle things down. He declared that the meeting had ended and that the school will conduct a thorough investigation, with repercussions for any misbehavior. Linda refused to look at me as we were leaving. My parents remained silent. The automobile ride home was terrible. The following few days were bizarre. Linda did not come to school. The investigation was ongoing. Kids were called in to make remarks. Jeff and I were interviewed separately. We told them everything, every event, threat, and lie. The principal appeared fatigued at the conclusion of it. He claimed he had never seen something like this in his 30 years of study. By Thursday, news had spread that the police were involved, not for Linda this time, but for Jeff's bogus detention. It turns out that submitting a false police complaint is a serious offense, even for minors, even if you're disabled. My parents finally began to crack. I overheard them arguing late at night. My father suggested that they had made a mistake by not listening to me. My mother was still defending Linda, but her tone was less assured. When I arrived home on Friday afternoon, Linda was already packing. She wouldn't talk to me and kept stuffing clothes into a suitcase. My mother told me that Linda would be staying with our aunt for a bit until things calmed down. I asked, "For how long?" My mom didn't respond. That night I finally sobbed. Not for Linda. This is not for my parents. For the little girl I used to be. The one who loved her sister wholeheartedly, who did her homework and shared her toys without questioning why it was never returned. That girl was gone. It has been a long time. I hadn't wanted to admit it. The weekend was too calm. Jeff came over on Saturday. We sat in my backyard without actually conversing. He stated that his parents were pressing charges against Linda and that she would most likely receive community service, probation, and even required therapy. I inquired whether he was fine with that. He claimed it wasn't about vengeance anymore, it was about ensuring she couldn't do it to anyone else. We sat silently for a while. Then he asked whether I wanted some ice cream. I said yes. It was the first normal thing I had done in years. We headed to the downtown restaurant with 30 kinds. I got chocolate, and he got vanilla. We sat outside watching people walk by. Nobody gazed at us. Nobody whispered. We were only two adolescents having ice cream. That was nice. Linda called on Sunday night, for the first time since she had departed. She sounded strange. Tired. She apologized. That is what she had been thinking. She realized what she had done. How she'd hurt others. Hurt me. I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her immediately. The other part recalled every hurt, lie, and humiliation. I told her I needed time. She said she understood and was receiving therapy. This time I really need aid, not just playing along to get people to stop bothering her. We hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at my phone for a long time, unsure if she meant it. I was wondering if it mattered. Monday at school was different. People continued to discuss what had transpired, but it was no longer the primary emphasis. Life was moving along. Jeff and I had lunch together. Not as lover and girlfriend. Not yet. Just as buddies who had gone through a dreadful experience together. Sarah joined us. So did Alan and Pamela from my English class. Suddenly, I had something I had never had before. Actual pals. People who knew the truth and chose to support me anyway. It felt strange but pleasant. My folks were still struggling. They'd phone during the day to check on me, see if I was all right, and if I needed anything. It was the most attention they had given me in years. I wasn't sure how to handle it. A part of me felt angry. Where was your compassion when I was covered in bruises? When was I crying myself to sleep? But part of me was simply exhausted. Too exhausted to hang on to my fury. By Wednesday, the principal had proclaimed that the investigation had completed. Disciplinary action had been taken. He didn't elaborate, but everyone understood what he meant. Linda's everlasting record would reflect what she had done. College applications would be impacted, scholarships lost. Her existence, constructed on lies, was crumbling. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I simply felt empty. Jeff noticed. He replied, "It's okay to have mixed feelings. She's still your sister." I nodded, but did not trust myself to speak. That afternoon, I went to the bathroom and discovered Piton weeping in a cubicle. Piton, a freshman, had been one of Linda's strongest defenders. I asked if they were okay. They claimed they felt dumb. They had believed what Linda said, thinking they were protecting someone weak. They didn't know what to believe anymore. I told them it wasn't their fault, that Linda was skilled at deception, and that wanting to protect someone was nothing to be embarrassed of. Peyton nodded, wiped his eyes and added, "Thanks for not rubbing it in." I said, "I wouldn't do that." We had all been duped at some point. There was additional news on Thursday. The local news wanted to cover the story. The principal promptly pulled it down, saying the students involved were minors and needed privacy. I was thankful. I didn't want extra attention. Jeff's family had less luck. Someone had revealed their identity in conjunction with the fake detention. They were receiving calls from reporters. His mother was furious, saying they just wanted to move on and put everything behind them. But the internet does not forget. Screenshots of Linda's posts were still being circulated. People analyzed them and pointed out discrepancies. It was like seeing a vehicle crash in slow motion. You tried to look away, but couldn't. Friday was Linda's birthday. In previous years there had been a great event with parties and gifts, and everyone fawned over her. This year, nothing. My parents did not even mention it. I pondered about texting her. I typed out message after message. I deleted them all. What would you say to someone who has terrorized you for years? Happy birthday seemed inadequate. Jeff inquired if I was all right. I said I didn't know. He also emphasized that it was fine that the mending process was not linear. Some days might be more challenging than others. We were seated in the library when Kai arrived. Kai was the kid who had recorded Linda's cafeteria tantrum and shared it in the group chat. They expressed shame, as if they had begun all of this. I assured them they hadn't started anything. They simply chronicled what was already happening. Kai went on. Still, seeing someone's life fall apart because of something I recorded, it's heavy. I understood what they meant. Even though Linda had harmed me, seeing her lose everything was unsatisfying. It was simply sad. The weekend was a blur. I finished my homework, watched TV, and pretended everything was fine. My parents kept their distance from me. They'd ask if I'd like to talk. I've always said no. What was there to say? That I was correct all along. Should they have trusted me? Everything would remain the same. Sunday night my father knocked on my door. He apologized. That he had failed me as a parent. That he should have noticed what was happening. I assured him it wasn't his fault and that Linda was good at what she did. He answered with a sigh. No. I should have protected you. Both of you. I should have gotten Linda real help years ago. Instead, I enabled her. We both did. He was crying. I'd never seen my father cry before. I hugged him. I told him we will sort it out. Perhaps it was not too late. He hugged me back and said he loved me. He was proud of me for surviving, for being strong, and for remaining compassionate in the face of adversity. I too sobbed. Years of pain, anger, and loneliness are pouring out. We remained like this for a long time. Monday brought unexpected news. Linda was returning to school. The administration decided she could finish the year under certain restrictions. She had to attend required counseling and keep a distance from certain students, including Jeff and me. Any infringement would lead to immediate expulsion. I spotted her in the hallway between the second and third periods. She looked shrunken, defeated. She noticed me too. Started walking over. Then I remembered the rules. I turned and went the other way. It was bizarre. For so long, she had been a huge presence in my life, causing fear and pain. Now she was merely a girl who had lost everything. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the bruises, the lies, and the years of suffering. The sympathy disappeared. Maybe I can forgive her someday. Perhaps someday we'll be sisters again. But not today. Not yet. Today all I needed to do was focus on mending. On rebuilding the life she had fought so hard to destroy. About being free. On discovering who I was without her shadow hanging over me. On discovering what it means to live fearlessly. On discovering my own voice after years of stillness. The next 2 weeks were bizarre. Linda stayed primarily to herself. She ate her lunch alone in the cafeteria corner. Kids would gaze, but no one spoke to her. Occasionally during class, I noticed her glancing at me. When our eyes met, she hurriedly looked away. Jeff claimed she tried to approach him once after school. Security intervened before she could go close, reminding her of the restraining order. She simply nodded and went away. Part of me wondered what she intended to say. The other half did not care. My folks were trying way too hard to make up for lost time. Mom started preparing my favorite foods every night. Dad would ask me about my day and truly listen to my response. It felt artificial, as if they were following a screenplay titled, How to Be Good Parents. I went along with it because fighting seemed meaningless. Mom remarked one night at supper that Linda's therapist wanted to do a family session to help with her healing. I nearly choked on my pasta. I told her categorically not. Dad backed me up, saying I'd been through enough. Mom did not bring it up again. School was returning to usual. The Linda drama was old news. People moved on to other gossip, such as who was dating whom, who failed which test, and other typical adolescent topics. That was nice. Jeff and I spent more time together. Not exactly dating, just hanging out, going to movies, and grabbing meals. Normal friend things. His folks would occasionally ask me over for supper. His brother Peter would show me his drawings. They outperformed anything I could do. He was pleased when I told him that. Then came a day when everything changed again. It was Thursday. I was having lunch with Jeff and Sarah when I heard a disturbance. Somebody was yelling. I turned to find Linda standing on a table. She was yelling at a freshman who had allegedly run into her. The kid seemed afraid. Everyone was staring and recording. Linda did not appear to care. She was constantly ranting about disrespect and how everyone believed they were superior to her. A teacher ran over and instructed her to get down. She refused, claiming she was tired of being treated like nothing. The teacher requested security. That's when Linda noticed me watching. Her face turned to a strange expression, as if she had suddenly remembered something. She jumped down from the table and began walking toward me. Fast. The teacher shouted for her, but she ignored him. Jeff stood up, placed himself between us, and ordered her to stop. She attempted to go around him. He moved to block her again. That was when she snapped. She shoved him hard. He stumbled backward and collided with our table. Food got everywhere. I jumped up to aid him. That's when I felt her grabbing my hair. She dragged me around to face her and began shouting about how it was all my fault, how I had ruined her life, and how everyone adored me and despised her. I attempted to get away, but she had a strong grip. Children were yelling. Teachers were running over. But before they could reach us, something unexpected occurred. Peter, Jeff's brother, arrives unexpectedly. He was meant to attend his special education class. But there he was. He came up to Linda, calm as could be. He replied, "Please let go of her. You're hurting her. That's not nice." Linda froze. I stared at him. Her grip eased. Peter smiled at her, a genuine pleasant grin. He went on. "It's okay to be mad, but hurting people doesn't make the mad go away. It makes me more mad." Everyone was hushed as they watched this child with true Down syndrome demonstrate greater emotional intelligence than any of us. Lily let go of my hair. Her hands shook. She looked around at everyone's faces and phones, which were all recording. The teachers eventually found us. There's also security. They took Linda away. She did not resist, just kept staring at Peter as they carried her away. The principal expelled her that afternoon. No more chances. She had violated every condition of her reinstatement, attacking 2 pupils and making threats. It was over. My parents were called in. They had to pick up her belongings. Mom cried the entire time. Dad simply looked exhausted. That night they told me Linda was going to a therapeutic boarding school. Somewhere where she could get the help she needed. Somewhere far away. I asked, "How long?" They estimated at least a year, possibly more, depending on her growth. I said, "Okay." Was there anything further to say? Jeff's back was bruised from hitting the table. His parents sought to file more charges. He told them no. He simply wanted it to end. They respected his decision. Peter constantly wondered if Linda was okay, if she was getting therapy for her anger issues. We told him yes. He appeared satisfied, saying that everyone deserved care whether they were unhappy or angry. The kid was intelligent beyond his years. It made me wonder how things might have turned out differently if Linda had been more like him, using her intelligence for good rather than deception. The following few days were quiet. It's too quiet, like the calm after the storm. Children at school treated me differently. Not harsh, but cautious, as if I could smash anything. I despised it. I told Jeff that I simply wanted things to be normal. He claimed normal was relative, and we'd discover our new normal, whatever it was. Sarah began joining us for lunch each day. So did Pamela and Alan. Peyton too, on sometimes. I'd gone from eating alone to with a large group. It was nice, but also overwhelming. I was not used to having buddies. A week after Linda left, I discovered a letter in my locker. Her penmanship. My hand shook when I opened it. It was long, 3 pages long. She wrote about how regretful she was, how she had been thinking about everything during treatment, how she realized she had been jealous of me since we were children, not because I was average looking, but because I was kind. People liked me for who I was, rather than because they felt sorry for me. She claimed that she had converted jealousy into hatred, allowing it to engulf and control her. She stated that she did not seek forgiveness, but rather wanted me to know that she was making an effort to change and improve. I read it twice before folding it up and putting it in my backpack. I wasn't sure what to do with it. I didn't know how to feel. Jeff inquired whether I was all right when I met him after school. I showed him the letter. He read it silently, returned it, and asked what I wanted to do with it. I said I didn't know. He said that was fine. I didn't have to make any decisions right now. We walked to his home. Peter was in the front yard, painting with chalk. He had decorated the entire driveway with pictures of flowers, suns, and stick figure families. When he noticed us, he ran over and asked if we wanted to draw together. We spent the next hour building on his masterpiece. It was the most serene I had felt in years. That weekend my parents informed me that they too were starting therapy, family counseling, to work through their shame and mistakes. They asked if I wanted to join someday. I said, maybe someday. Not yet. They claimed they understood, that I could take as much time as I wanted. Mom had quit watching reality television. I started reading parenting books instead. Dad was more present and he worked from home whenever possible. It was strange to see them strive so hard. But it's also kind of pleasant. Maybe we'll be a true family eventually. Jeff asked me on a specific date the following Friday. He said he had been waiting until everything calmed down and I was ready. I said yes. We went to mini golf. I was horrible at it. He wasn't doing any better. We giggled each time one of us hit the ball into the sea. It was perfect. Normal. Only two adolescents on a horrible date. There's no drama. There are no complications. It's just us. We walked home holding hands. His palms were sweaty. So was mine. Neither of us cared. When he kissed me goodnight on my doorstep, it was awkward, sweet, and perfectly appropriate. After that, life settled into a routine. School, homework, socializing with friends, dates with Jeff, and Sunday dinners with his family. Peter usually reserved a seat next to him for me. I told everyone I was his friend. His parents treated me like family. It was everything I'd lost growing up: acceptance, tenderness, and the sense of being wanted simply for being myself. Not for what I could accomplish for someone. Not for being silent and absorbing insults. Just for being me. 3 months later, I received another letter from Linda. This one was different. Instead of apologizing, she focused on what she was learning. How she worked with her therapist to better understand her conduct. How she started assisting younger students at the school who had impairments. How it made her feel wonderful to utilize her intelligence to benefit rather than harm. She added a snapshot of herself with a bunch of young children, all smiling. She looked different. Calmer. Perhaps even happy. I also retained that letter. Still did not answer. But I did not throw it away either. My parents asked whether I wanted to see her. I said no. They did not push. Just mentioned that the choice was available if I changed my mind. They had also undergone significant changes. Mom apologized probably 100 times, saying she had failed both of us. Dad had begun coaching a special needs basketball team, which he said helped him appreciate what real disabilities looked like, and how much more difficult life was for families dealing with actual obstacles rather than contrived ones. We ate dinner together every night and discussed our days. It wasn't ideal, but it was better. Jeff and I had been dating for 6 months when Linda called, our first time hearing her voice since everything transpired. She sounded strange, calmer, more mature. She explained that she understood if I didn't want to talk. I just wanted to hear my voice and know she was doing better. That therapy was helpful. That she had been admitted into a special program for children with behavioral challenges, was learning coping skills, and made genuine friends. I listened but didn't say much. When she inquired how I was doing, I replied, "Good," and meant it. I was good. Finally. After years of not being excellent, I was finally good. She inquired about Jeff and whether we were happy. I said yes. She stated she was pleased. That he was a good person. I deserved someone decent. There was a prolonged hush. Then she claimed she needed to depart since group therapy was starting. Before hanging up, she expressed her love for me. I said, "Okay. Not I love you too. Just okay." That was all I could manage. Maybe someday I'll be able to say it back. But not yet. Not today. Today, okay, was enough for both of us. Senior year began with changes. Linda was not coming back. She had graduated from her program but was still attending a therapeutic college where she could continue to receive treatment while studying. My folks paid her a visit once a month. I still did not go. I did send a birthday card, however. She mailed one back to me. Small steps. Jeff and I were still together, preparing for college. We had applied to some of the same institutions, not necessarily to stay together, but because we shared similar interests. If we wind up in the same place, that's terrific. If not, we'll work something out. The year went by: prom, graduation, and summer preparations. I never imagined I'd be able to enjoy normal teenage milestones. Linda mailed a graduation card. Inside, she'd written about how proud she was of me, how strong I'd been, and how sorry she was. I kept it alongside the letters, my collection of apologies. Proof that she was attempting. That perhaps people will change. Even folks who had committed awful acts. Even those who have injured you in ways that leave scars. The physical ones had disappeared. The emotional ones took longer. However, they were healing too slowly. College admission letters arrived. Jeff got into his dream school. So did I. Different schools. Different states. We decided to take a long-distance vacation. If it works, amazing. If not, at least we had each other when we needed it the most. Had someone who understood. Who had been there. Who had seen the worst but stayed anyway. It was worth battling for. It's worthwhile to strive to maintain consistency across kilometers and time zones. We have survived worse. We could survive the distance. My parents hosted a small party the night before I departed for college, attended only by family and close friends. Jeff and his family arrived. Peter handed me a drawing he had created. It was us in miniature golf stick figures, but you could tell which one was who. I agreed to hang it in my dorm room, and I would put it just above my desk, so I could view it every day. Remember that even negative situations can lead to positive outcomes. That family was not always blood-related. That sometimes the individuals who save you are the ones you don't expect. As I packed my car the next morning, I discovered one more letter, this one from my parents. They told me how proud they were. They were still really remorseful, how much they adored me. They hoped that education would fulfill all of my dreams. How they'd always be available when I needed them. Better late than never. I hugged each of them. I really hugged them. Not the stiff, perfunctory hugs of the past, real ones. Mom cried. Dad too. I might have as well. It was a moment. A good one. We had been in need of one for quite some time. The drive to college was long, gave me time to reflect on all that had happened. How different life is today. How I went from being invisible to having people notice me. Who cares? Who showed up? It was hardly the upbringing I had envisioned. It was not the family I had hoped for. But it was mine. Messy, difficult, and painful. Finally, okay. Better than okay. Good. I was good. My life was good. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.